Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. This is episode 87 of Captain's Quarters Podcast, and we got a very special friend and a very special guest here, and he's going to be on the show with us the entire time, even while we're doing some of the things we normally do. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Stephen L. Sears.
Hola.
Hola to you, and here's a drink. But first, what do we always do at the beginning? We got to tell everybody how to find us. Go to YouTube, hit that QR code, hit the like, hit the follow, hit the bell, hit everything. That way you can get a message or two when we're getting ready to do another show. Every week, every Monday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Those of you that are on the West Coast, well, it's a bit early for you, but we still want you to be around. We're lucky we have people watching us on YouTube now from all over the world. South America, Canada, England, Germany, and the United States. So, we're doing well and we're happy. QR code, YouTube, Captain's Quarters Podcast. Be there. Aye. Now, of course, we always do 8 Bells. Now, as we're getting ready to do 8 Bells, it's sponsored by, ladies and gentlemen, our family friends, the Rikers, a group of reenactors that are supportive of the St. Augustine Swashbucklers and Captain William Mayhem. We love having them there. He is also part of the reenactors of the Fort, the Men of Menendez, say that 3 times real fast, and the militia. So, 8 Bells, here we have it. 4 different people we'd like to show honor to. I hear thunder in the background. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Treat Williams. I was not aware of this one, and I'm very sorry. I was a big fan. Was an American actor, author, and aviator. He first came to prominence with his appearance in 2 1979 films, the musical Hair and Steven Spielberg's 1941. Williams' accolades include nominations for 2 Screen Actors Guild Awards, 3 Golden Globes, a Primetime Emmy, 2 Satellite Awards, and an Independent Spirit Award. Ladies and gentlemen, he was 71 years old. John Victor Romita Sr. was an American comic book artist best known for his work on Marvel Comics' The Amazing Spider-Man and for co-creating characters including Mary Jane Watson, The Punisher, Wolverine, and Luke Cage. Romita was the father of John Romita Jr., also a comic book artist and the husband of Virginia Romita, for many years Marvel's traffic manager. He was 93. And Robert Adams Gottlieb was an American writer and editor. He was the editor-in-chief of Simon & Schuster, Alfred A. Comp, and The New Yorker. He is the author of biographies of George Balanchine, Sarah Bernhardt, and the family of Charles Dickens, as well as of a collection of his critical essays. He was 92. And Cormac McCarthy, an American writer who authored 12 novels, 2 plays, 5 screenplays, and 3 short stories, spanning the Western and post-apocalyptic... Why do we put these words in there? He was known for his graphic depiction of violence and his unique writing style, recognizable by a sparse use of punctuation and attributions. McCarthy is widely regarded as one of the greatest American novelists. He was 89. Ladies and gentlemen, that's 4. We have another. Stephen and I were talking about it earlier. Stephen is a member of the Magic Castle, and one of the major people behind the Magic Castle in California passed away last week. His name was Milt Larson. He was a motivator and a mover in the magic world. He is responsible for some of the most famous magicians of our times. Doug Henning, David Copperfield, Lance Burton, every one of them owes something to Milt Larson. And he died last week. So, as a magician myself, and as a member of the Magic Castle, we give honor to Mr. Milt Larson. Also, with all of them, Mr. Davey, 8 bells, please. I thought it only proper to drink a dark and stormy to each and every one of those. Our fans, we say, keep a remembrance of them. Read, write, and watch their things. Thank you very much. Aye. Good job, Davey.
Well done.
Quote of the week, Mr. Davey, is sponsored by Spyglass Travel, who has become an official total sponsor of the St. Augustine Swashbucklers and the Captain's Quarters podcast.
Quote
they will
first.
be our sponsor for the next year. Yes, sir, Davey?
Quote first and then joke of the week.
We can do quote if you like. We'll do joke of the week in just a few minutes.
Yeah.
Go ahead with quote.
I have two of them.
All right, let's see the first one.
Because we have Stephen Sears here.
The funny thing about people, just when you think you've got them figured out, they show a completely different side to their character. None other than Xena, Princess Warrior. That's a good quote. And it ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Mark Twain. I like that one, too. That's a good one. We do a lot of Mark Twain quotes here because, well, he was a wise man. There you have it. So, go ahead with joke of the week there, Mr. Davey.
All right.
Ahoy, mate. Mini Mayhem here with the joke of the week. Sponsored by Shivery Pictures. What does a pirate use his cell phone for? Think about it, and I will give you the answer at the end of the show.
We'll have the reveal on that joke towards the end of the show. Yes, we do get comments from people that the voice of little Mini Mayhem is a bit hard to understand at times, and we're working on some other ideas for him. We'll see what happens here over the next couple of weeks. I will tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, the summertime is very open for me. I'm only doing 3 days a week at the Pirate and Treasure Museum now, Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays. Monday for the podcast. That gives me Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, maybe to finally catch up with all the things that are happening. I bet Mr. Steven knows how that is, trying to catch up with everything.
Still trying to catch up with my age.
Yeah, well, yeah, I try not to let anybody know that anymore. So we've had quote of the week and question of the week. I mean, quote of the week and joke of the week, but we do have a fast, down and dirty question for everybody. Go ahead, Davey, pop it up there. If you know anything about television shows from 1989 to 2000, tell us what your favorite television show was in honor of the man that's sitting there in the bottom screen. In fact, I bet you that most of you will mention shows that he's had something to do with. Because he's had something to do with so many of them, it would be a great Vegas bet, I can tell you that. Davey, are you hearing the roar of the rain over my head?
Yes.
Yeah, it's
here
raining pretty heavy here right now. I'll tell you if I have to start bailing. We'll let you know. After that, ladies and gentlemen, we normally do something about crew adventures, both completed and on the horizon. The only thing we really have is that last weekend the crew did a big giant yard sale and put about $430 into our charity fund. So that was good to go. And then we turned around this week, ladies and gentlemen, and we've given away almost $1,000 out of our charity fund to some people that had medical issues that needed help. So we've done that this week, and that's what we're all about, the St. Augustine Swashbucklers and Captain's Quarters podcast. On that note, though, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time to officially introduce our guest, Mr. Stephen L. Sears. Now, Davey, that banner that you have that shows all the shows, put that up there real fast so people get a good, quick idea. You got an applause. How about that? I don't know where it comes from.
I thought that was hail.
Then, ladies and gentlemen, look at all these shows that he's had his finger in. And I bet many of you have probably seen some of those shows. I have seen many of them, and I'm quite impressed. Go ahead, Davey, take it down. And in honor, I say, I love it when a plan comes together.
Well done.
And now you know why the rum is always going. So, you're out in Hollywood. You are...
You're right.
Yes, I know. Don't you think you want to leave California yet?
I got split feelings about that, to be honest.
I'm sure. So I inadvertently put in most of my advertisements for you to post this, that you are a native of St. Augustine, and I was wrong. Mm-hmm. You're a military brat.
That's right, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your life and how you're connected to St. Augustine and how, like everybody else that comes here, falls in love with it, and this is their hometown.
Yeah. Well, my dad was in the Army, and I was born into that. So for the first part of my life, I knew nothing but military bases. So those of you who have served, or those of you who have been military brats, every 3 years, you are rotated out to a different assignment. And one of our assignments was to move to St. Augustine, where my dad was the Army liaison to the National Guard at the Francis Barracks. And we only spent 3 years. I was at R.B. Hunt Elementary School. Yay, shout out for R.B. Hunt. And then, of course, we moved away to our next assignment, which was in Fort Knox, Kentucky. But when my dad retired, we had made friends in St. Augustine, and we just fell in love with the town. Just absolutely. It's one thing that brats will tell you is they travel around the world, and every now and then you find a place that just resonates so well with you. So when he retired, we just naturally moved back to St. Augustine. But in those 3 short years that we were there, the city just embraced us. We embraced it. I loved the history. I was so involved with that. And as I mentioned earlier, before we came on the air, that it was one of those things where I feel like St. Augustine was always my hometown. It just took a little while to find it. So, so that's how I ended up in St. Augustine, and went to Catalinas Junior High School, then St. Augustine High School.
Prior to COVID, you would come for regular visits, correct?
Oh yeah. I tried to make it at least once a year. Yeah, but I haven't been there in about 2 or 3 years, so I'm kind of jonesing for my family.
Well, we'll give you a public invite. I know it was private when we were talking earlier, but a public invite that if you come along and come back to St. Augustine, and it's over a time frame where we on a Monday night, we'll do a live show here, and we'll invite some of the friends that are part of the show. And is that thunder going on over there with you too, Davey? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Wow.
Yeah, it's cool. Pretty storming all across. Davey and I are about, 15 miles apart. Yeah.
Wow.
So what we'll do is we'll have a party, because my pirate man cave is 986 square feet. This is just a small part of it right here. And we can have guests sitting in here, and we can have a righteously great piratical time.
I have to hold on. I forgot. I have to pirate up here. It's the closest I can get to it. So there we go.
All right. That's one of the ones when I do the children's tours in the Pirate Museum. Kids will come up and go, "Where's your parrot? Where's your parrot?" So you have 2 answers depending on how smart alecky I'm feeling. The first answer is he flew away. I don't have any more polygrip. The other answer is well, I was hungry.
Okay.
All right. So you've written.
Cool. I'm looking at the people who are showing in. I know some of these people.
Yes, you do. You sure do. And if they ask for pop-up questions, we're going to make sure we talk about it.
That's awesome.
So Steve's dad and my dad work together. That would be Melinda. Melinda.
Which Melinda?
How many Melindas do you know?
I actually know several.
So Melinda, I don't know what Melinda's maiden name was when you would have known her then. So she can pop up with that if she wants.
Yeah.
She's a part of our crew.
Cool.
And then Donna. There's a couple of others that probably their names pop up here, and some of them.
I saw Mark pop up because he made a comment about the Magic Castle.
Yeah.
How you doing? And Jim Neuenfeld, he showed up.
Al Lane is watching. He's a Navy brat there. So, and then Jim Neuenfeld, he's there. Spies. I bet that's his favorite TV show or his favorite movie. Spies. Let's see. Walker, Texas Ranger, and A-Team was my most favorite. Next to Swamp Thing, The Highwayman.
Oh my
gosh. Very good.
You people realize you don't have to name mine. You don't have to. That's funny because odds are what you name, I may have associations with it somehow. But I also probably were fans. I was probably a fan of the show myself.
So in writing all these shows, Xena, Walker, Texas Ranger, the A-Team, did you have direct association with many of the stars?
Yes, and by the way, I now know who Nightingale in Florida is. Hey. So anyway, ask your question again. I'm sorry. I was
so did you have direct, as a writer, does a writer have direct association or direct relationship with the stars of the show?
It depends on the show and what your level is. When I started out in the business, which was totally accidental, I'd never planned to do any of this stuff. It just kind of happened. Well, it didn't just kind of happen, but I kind of backed into it. I started out as a staff writer originally, and for most staff writers, especially in the 80s, when I started out, you had an office, you wrote your scripts, and then they did it down on the set. So your interaction with the actors were very, very sparse. There have been a couple of actors that I've met much later on when I was producing, for example, and I would have to remind them, you do realize I wrote for you back on a certain show, and then they're kind of like, oh my gosh, I remember your scripts, but I don't remember you, because we never really had a huge interaction with each other. The first show I worked on was a show called Riptide. In fact, those are the stars of Riptide. It's Tom Bray and Perry King and Joe Penny. And that was with Stephen J. Cannell Productions. And Steve ran a very writer-friendly production company. He was producing A-Team, Riptide, Hardcastle McCormick, Hunter, Stingray, all of these great shows. But he encouraged his writers to be a part of every aspect of production. So we didn't actually have to stay in our office. We'd be part of the post-production, dealing with the editing, the sound spotting, and the pre-production, working with the director to actually sit in on production meetings. And every now and then, we would either have a read-through with the actors, or in some cases, we'd have to go down to the set to address certain problems, or just basically to kind of show the flag. So as I moved up in my position, became more of a writer and a creator and a showrunner, then yes, at that point, obviously the actors not only knew who I was, they sometimes dreaded it.
Did the captain freeze on us?
I think he did. And that is exactly how stunning I can be at times.
Of course. Well, that's interesting.
Let's see. Okay. That's
So,
yes.
all the people watching, if you have questions about any of Steven's shows, please go ahead, ask them, and I will pop them up there while we're waiting for the captain to come back to us.
Okie doke. I'm looking over here and seeing.
Oh, okay. He'll probably log back on.
Oh my gosh! Was it me? Let me have that thunderstorm. Let's see. I am. Oh, okay. I got confused here. I was actually watching a conversation between Melinda and Jim here, and I was like, "Who are they talking about?" And I realized who they're talking about.
There's one for you.
Now, here's a question, though. Linda Nightingale in Florida, I should say, just asked me what I think of Richard Boone.
I can ask my question.
So Richard Boone, hello.
I have a question I can ask you.
That's not Richard Boone.
May I ask you a question?
Yes, and I'm going to hold on the Richard Boone. I will answer that question.
Richard Boone.
Yes. Is that the question you're asking?
I'm asking why in the past it seems like shows had many more episodes than what they do now. For instance, David and I enjoy watching Ghosts and Young Sheldon, some things like that. There are only 21, maybe 22 episodes in a season. Whereas I went back on Google to see, like, for instance, even Gilligan's Island and things like that. They seem to have so many more episodes in their seasons. Do you know what happened?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it all has to do with, first of all, everything has to do with money.
Yes.
It also has to do with technology and the way things have accelerated and moved along. The basic financial structure of Hollywood has changed completely. At one time, shows were sponsored throughout the year by one company. Procter & Gamble might sponsor an entire show.
Yes.
And in the process of doing that, they were paying for basically all the episodes and getting the advertising out of it. But that was also back before the technology changed to where we had syndication. So you would end up with, instead of having a 30-episode season, which would take up the entire year, they said, wait a minute, let's see, if we do only 22 episodes, we save all that money instead of shooting 30 episodes, But what we can do is we can rerun those episodes. That's why most people, especially my age and generation, we remember the reruns during the summer
Yeah.
reruns. So less episodes were required. These days, what you have is there's so much software and so much product out there because of so many cable channels and the streaming channels that they try to save money by, and by the way, the writer's strike right now is dealing with a lot of this.
Yeah.
They save money by limiting a lot of things, including the writer's participation, but they'll have maybe 10 episodes because they know people are not basically competing with other channels. In other words, I can watch one series and binge the whole thing, and then the next night I can watch another series and binge it, even though they're on completely different services. They're not competing with each other. But it really all comes down to movie making and the different technologies. Also, since the advertiser base has changed, back in the day it was commercials that financed it. These days it's mostly subscriber based, so they know what their budgets are. They can go ahead and predetermine how many episodes they want to do, compartmentalize that, put it off, and then they can offload it onto DVDs, secondary syndication. So really it comes down to the money and trying to get as much property and product out there. And that's the short
It's really storming badly here.
It is terrible here. We just lost electricity
Stephen.
real
Thank
quick.
you.
And then I didn't think the computer was ever going to power back up.
That's okay. We were answering questions, Captain.
That's
One of my
good. That's
long-winded
fine.
answers. And one of the questions that we were just about to talk about was about Richard Boone. Richard Boone, a resident of St. Augustine. Obviously, most of you hopefully know about Richard Boone. He was Paladin, Have Done Will Travel. He was also Heck Ramsey. And I was very fortunate to have worked with Richard Boone. The first celebrity I ever worked with was in St. Augustine, and that was Richard Boone. It was Cross and Sword. I was, the first time I ever went on stage for pay, for actually getting paid as a professional, was Cross and Sword. And in the second season that I was there, Richard Boone had come on as an advisor to the board on Cross and Sword. So, they changed the opening to his voice, his narration voice, and then he was always down there on the set. And then after that, he produced a movie called The Dog in the Manger, written by Lope de Vega, which was shown in the old pool area of the Alcazar Hotel, back when it was the Teatro Menendez. And I was in that. So he was actually the first celebrity that I ever worked with there in St. Augustine. So, yeah, I got to tell you, one of the most interesting men, and I mean it in a positive way, his wealth of experience was incredible. His knowledge, obviously, but his intensity, just when you would talk to him, it's like he talked at you and through you at the same time. Very interesting man.
I got a chance to meet him when I was a child in the 1960s. There's a diner that no longer is here, and for some reason, for the life of me, I can't think of the name of the diner. It was on US 1, right near US 1 and 16. And somebody else that's watching the show, they'll remind me of the name of the diner. But we used to go there all the time when we were here because my uncle's beer distribution warehouse was not that far away from it, so we would go there. And I got to meet, Richard Boone was there, and I was a huge fan of Paladin, and we go in there, and I don't know, I'm 8 years old, 9 years old, and it's like, there he is. And he was very generous and very nice. He wasn't rude. Some little 8-year-old kid comes up to him. He could have said, "Go away, kids, you bother me." But
Yeah.
he was cool about it. And I've heard some great stories. I also heard he did an acting class here at Flagler College for a while too.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So.
And as Jim mentioned, he also was, he had quite a relationship with whiskey. He was a drinker.
Yes.
Yes.
He was. That was a known fact also. That's probably why he knew my uncle. So I was going to ask a question beforehand, before I got so rudely interrupted by the man upstairs. When you started to have any kind of interaction with the stars of the shows that you wrote for, after you've met them, and now you know their personality, so to speak. Does that change some of your writing for their work, for their lines, for their input? Is my question making sense?
Yeah, it actually is. Yes, there's a whole ebb and flow to a TV series. It's a living thing. If I were to create a series, which I have done, and I write a pilot, all the characters are in my head already. They haven't been cast yet. I don't have actors to play them, but they're already in my head. So as I start looking for the actors, I begin to start to adapt what I'm writing to their particular style and personality. Nobody is going to match exactly what's in my head 100%. So I'm looking for the best I can get, and the best I can get is somebody who actually brings me a little extra to it, something like what we call little treasures that we didn't expect. So at that point, when the character starts to act and become part of the performance, it's a give and take. There's a flow back and forth. When I'm writing freelance or I'm writing for a show that I did not create or I wasn't there at the beginning, I've always been very, very good at somehow adopting and understanding different characters as they were presented to me, and I write toward that. So, as an actor, which I'm also an actor, I started out as an actor, an actor does a role, but there's always pieces of that actor in that role. Some actors are celebrities in the sense that the roles are always them. Other ones are true actors in the sense that they become those characters, but there's always pieces of them that go into it. And the quicker you can understand that, the better your writing synchronicity goes. And sometimes it's a trial and error. When Xena, for an example, when I first came aboard Xena, she had been in a couple of episodes, 3 episodes of Hercules, which was our Big Brother series. If it weren't for Hercules, we would not have had even been launched. But I wasn't sure about what Lucy's acting ability was. I'd never worked with her before. I just saw those 3 episodes. And I remember R.J. Stewart, who was one of the co-exec producers, later the exec producer on the show, he and I talked about this. And at first we thought, well, you know what, let's give her some sparse dialogue, kind of Clint Eastwood type of little piffy lines here and there, and see what she can do with it. And so Lucy Lawless, who played Xena, would take something like that and then turn it into magic. And so we were like, okay, challenge accepted. So we would write something else. And we're like, all right, take this on. And then she would take it and give us a little treasure. And we had what I referred to as an upward spiral of appreciation. We loved what she was doing and she loved what we were writing. So it became this really, really good synchronicity between us and Lucy and the other actors on the show. So I find that the best writing I do is when I have a basic understanding of the actor. Now, that does not mean whether I like them or dislike them. It has to do with I look at their approach to that particular character, and I try to adopt that into my writing. But at the same time, my writing always has me in it. So it is kind of an ebb and flow type of thing.
Speaking from a pirate point of view, Johnny Depp is a perfect example of how Jack Sparrow, the character he's almost mostly known for. He's done other great characters. But Jack Sparrow, if you look at almost everything else he does, there is a little piece of Jack Sparrow in almost everything he does. Truly.
Yeah, or there's a little bit of Johnny Depp that Jack Sparrow exploited, and it became everything else.
You know what? Yeah. I would concede that's an even better point. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I met Johnny back when he was doing 21 Jump Street. That was his big show, and that was a Cannell show, and I was working at Cannell at the time. And I was actually back at St. Augustine High School. This was a while back, and I was talking to the students. And I invariably get the question of well, who's the most famous celebrity you've ever met? And I don't know how to answer that because these are working relationships for me. And I've never been really starstruck by the people you would expect me to be starstruck. And so I just kind of said, well, I don't know who you think of as a celebrity. And somebody said, Johnny Depp. And I said, well, yes, I have met Johnny. And everybody was like, oh. And I said, okay, let me tell you how I met Johnny Depp. I'm walking down the hallway at Stephen J. Cannell Productions. Les Sheldon, a producer of 21 Jump Street, is walking up the hallway with this young kid. And he says, Steve, I want you to meet the star of one of our new shows. This is Johnny. And I said, hey, Johnny, how are you doing? We shook hands. He said something like, I'm doing great. And I said, well, good luck on the show. That was it.
Well, there are a lot of actors that just become iconic. He's one of them, obviously, because of what he does. But there are, and I'll put it from my perspective, because and I don't know if you know some of my background, but I did comedy clubs in Vegas, and I'm a comedy magician, stand-up comedy magician, which stand-up magicians hate stand-up comedians hate magicians because we're all prop comics. But there
I
are.
just saw a TikTok on that, by the way, from a prop magician who said stand-up comics hate me, and then he played something. He goes, puts it down. He goes, that's why.
Yeah, that's it. I know. I've seen that one.
Oh, you froze again.
Oh no, Captain. Let's see.
I'm beginning to think you don't want this to happen. All right. Well, while we're waiting for, let's take a look over here on our questions. Richard Burns, class, the only thing that did it. Work on your posture. Okay. That's funny. Holly Robinson. Yeah, she was very talented. I really liked her. Okay, so I'm looking over some of the questions here. I'm going to come up with kind of a standard launch-in point every time there's a weather interruption here. So, okay, so here. I am going to very briefly, to fill space here, but also because it might be interesting. I mentioned earlier that I had fallen into this. So for those of you who don't know, I will give you a quick chronology of how I fell into this thing. And the truth of the matter is, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. So I left St. Augustine, graduated St. Augustine High School, and I went to the University of Florida, where I was going to be pre-med, mainly because my dad was the administrator of Intermedic, which was the health company that basically responsible for St. Augustine General, along with all the other doctors, Dr. Langston and Dr. O'Connell and everybody else who put that together. So I had been around medicine quite a bit. I was fascinated with science. I used to spend a lot of time down in the geriatric wing of St. Augustine General, just listening to the amazing stories that these people would talk about of their lives. So I decided to go pre-med, and that was until I got a C in chemistry. So you don't go pre-med if you have a C in chemistry. Now, I had done Cross and Sword, and I'd done all the stage plays and everything at St. Augustine High School under John Mentalis, who was my teacher. I still remember him very, very fondly. So I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. You know, where was I going to go? And there was a movie on at the time, a popular movie called The Goodbye Girl, and that starred Richard Dreyfuss. Now, Richard Dreyfuss, he was well known for doing Jaws, but this was a Neil Simon written script, and people were telling me, "Oh, you should see it because he's playing you," which I thought was kind of weird. So I went and saw it, and there were some things about it that, they were kind of like me, and certainly I felt I could have played the role. And now he won an Oscar for that particular role. And I was at the University of Florida walking toward the Rights Union. And I remember thinking about that he had won an Oscar for playing me. And I thought to myself, well, of course, he would win an Oscar, but only special people get those. And I literally just stopped right there. And I thought, oh my God, if he had felt that way, he never would have gotten close to them. And so at that moment, I realized what I really wanted to do was perform. I wanted to act. So I called my dad, the 23-year Army serviceman, and I told him I wasn't going to be a doctor. I was going to be an actor. And my parents were just incredibly wonderful. My dad's immediate response was, "You've always loved it. Why don't you go do it?" And so I decided to do that. And at the time, I was at the University of Florida, but Florida State was where the big theater program was. So I took one side diversion at Florida Atlantic University for 1 quarter, and then I went to Florida State. And there I did a lot of other performances. And I met a gentleman named Chip Chalmers. And Chip had worked in Hollywood. So he was back there talking about the experience. And I visited with him while he was doing a little group discussion. And he made the mistake of saying, if any of you ever move out to Los Angeles, give me a call. So as soon as I graduated Florida State, I had already made that decision. So I moved to Los Angeles. And when I got there, I called Chip and I said, well, I'm here. I saw you there at Florida State. And I don't know. I just had some questions. This is a huge city. I'd lived on military bases in small towns. And suddenly I'm in this city of 3 to 7 million people. And he said, well, let's have lunch. So we set up a lunch. When lunch came about that day, I called him and I said, where do you want to meet for lunch? And he said, well, we're very, very busy. Why don't you come down to the studio? I was like, oh my God, a studio. I've never been on a studio lot. So it was the Fox lot, Fox Studios. So I went down there, and when I found his office, he said, look, we're really, really slammed with stuff. Do you mind if we eat on the set? And I'm like, oh my God, a set. We're going to go to a studio stage and I'm going to be on a set. First time ever. So we go to this stage, we go to the set, and he gets a phone call. And he says, I really apologize. I've got to go take care of something. He turned to one of the actors and he said, would you mind, having lunch with my friend? And this guy says, oh, sure, I'll have lunch with him. So that actor was David Sears, and it was the set of MASH. So my first experience on a set was I was having lunch with David Sears, with Loretta Swit, who is one of the residents of St. Augustine now, or at least mostly part-time, as I understand. But all of these people I had just watched on TV, I was sitting there having lunch with them. So that, first of all, was the first amazing experience. So after that, I was still trying to become an actor. But at the same time, I was writing audition scenes for myself. The reason for this is most of the casting directors I was meeting, they were tired of hearing the same material over and over again. So I started writing my own material. Yes, believe it or not, this is the short version of the story. So I decided to start writing my own material for auditions. Eventually, my little 3-minute scenes that I was writing were getting around to other acting studios. People were using them in the classes. So I met with this one casting director who had seen like several of the things I'd written, and she said, you should become a writer. Oh, there you are. So I decided, what the heck, I will try to write a script. Now, I was also working at a restaurant. Go figure, an actor working at a restaurant, that's cliched. But I met a guy named Bert Pearl, and he and I became the best of friends. And he and I decided to start writing scripts just for the fun of it. We had no intention of doing anything with it. We just enjoyed doing it. So I would call production offices, and I would ask these production offices if they had a writer's guide. And this is just because I was a curious person. I wanted to know what it was like to write a script. But I was an actor. I was not interested in writing. So I called over to this one show that I'd just seen the pilot, and the pilot was the series of Riptide. Now, as a connection to St. Augustine, I saw the pilot when I was sitting in the radio room of WFOY. I was talking to Ted Sage, and it was on the screen. And I just noticed it, and I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. So when I got back to California, I decided I would call over to the offices of Riptide and see if they had a writer's guide. So I got this person on the phone. And by the way, one of the things you were told back then is never make a phone call to the production companies. They'll just hang up on you. Oh, well, what the heck? I don't care. What are they going to do? So I called, and I got this woman on the phone, and she said, we don't have a writer's guide, but did you enjoy the show? And I said, yes. And then we got into this conversation. It just had nothing to do with the business. I mentioned I was from Florida. She had relatives in Florida. We were chatting. And at the end of that, she said, well, have you written any scripts? And I said, oh, me and my buddy have written a couple. And she said, well, if you want to, have an agent submit them, because the producers are always looking for writers. And that was it. She didn't get my name. I didn't get her name. But I called a guy I knew who was an agent, told him about the conversation, and he said, sure, I'll send him over. So he did. About a month later, Bert and I got a call from the offices of Riptide, and they said, why don't you come in and just talk to the producers? I thought, okay, well, maybe they're on hiatus. They got nothing else to do. So we went and met the producers, Tom Blomquist and Babs Grayhowski. We just had a great time with them. And during all this conversation, we're joking, we're kidding around, and they said, do you have any ideas for the show? And we were going to write a script for the fun of it, so we had a few ideas. So we mentioned them. We mentioned 5 ideas. 2 of them they didn't want to do. 3 of them they said, go think about those and come back next week. So the next week we came back with 2 of the ideas, a little more thought out. One of them we couldn't crack, but we came up with a 3rd idea. Well, they liked that 3rd idea, so they said, go write a story. Now, seriously, we didn't know what was going on. We just thought these people liked us. But it was a great way to get behind the scenes and learn how they thought. So we developed this story a little bit more, came back with a written up story, and we watched the 2 of them shred it and put it back together again, which was awesome. I love watching people who are passionate about their work. And we were involved. Bert and I were involved with all of this. At the end of that, Tom turns to me and he says, I need the name of your agent for business affairs. And I went, does that mean we got an assignment? And he said, you got the assignment 2 weeks ago. Now, literally, Bert and I had absolutely no idea what had just happened. When we walked out, Bert turns to me and he says, are we being paid? And I said, well, I hope so. I mean, I think writers get paid. I have no idea. I'm not a writer. And he goes, how much? And I said, well, the day rate for an actor at that time was $250 a day. So I said, I hope it's $500 so we can split it. So what we didn't know was that one script at that time was $15,000. Yeah, shock and surprise. When we got our story payment alone, literally it was like $3,000 each. And I called him immediately and I said, what is going on? We are working for the devil and they have bought our souls. That's the only explanation. That's it. We wrote the first draft of the script, turned it in, and I got a call, turned it in on Friday. And then on Monday, I got a call from Tom Blomquist, the story editor and later on the producer of Riptide. And he said, I read your script over the weekend. I liked it. I know that the A-Team and Hardcastle and McCormick are looking for writers, so I'm giving your names to them. Now, by the way, he left a message on my cassette tape answering machine, which I still have to this day. So I was like, again, I don't know what's going on. Wednesday, I'm sleeping on the floor with my then girlfriend because I actually couldn't afford a bed. I had been working as a waiter, and then I quit that job, and I was putting the ads in the front of shopping carts for $130 a month. I had saved up money. Daddy did not raise a fool. I knew how to save money. So I was waiting for my next job, but I didn't have a bed. So the phone rings, and I pick it up, and I'm like, hello? And this voice on the other end says, hi, Steve, this is Babs Grayhowski. And I went, oh, hi, how you doing, Babs? And she said, I'm doing great. Look, I gave your script to Stephen Cannell, the guy who owns the company. He only had 1 note in the entire script. And I went, oh, that's great. And she said, so we were thinking maybe you guys would like to come down here, get an office, and work for us full time. And I went, oh, yeah. And then she goes, you're asleep, aren't you? When you realize what I just said, call me back. And she hung up. I was instantly awake. I turned to my girlfriend and I'm like, was I just on the phone? Was I dreaming? She goes, she didn't know. So it took me about an hour before I called back because I was trying to script some way of finding out if that was real without looking like a total idiot if it wasn't. But I was put through to Tom Blomquist, and the first thing he said was, so you guys going to come on board? That's how my career started, and it hasn't ended.
Well, you've written for some of the most prolific shows of most of our listeners' young adulthood. I would say childhood, but I don't want to go that far back. But so you said a couple of things that have brought other questions into my head. Mm-hmm. So let's go with this one. And I know that while I'm gone, everybody's asking you questions. I'm glad that Davey's keeping the show alive. I'm not sure how you keep it up with the electricity going on over there, Longwood, but I got FPL over here, and I'm now, after tonight twice losing my show, I believe that FPL stands for the People's Lights, but that's a different story. So when you write your scripts and then you turn them in or you present them or whatever, have you ever had a time where somebody said, I don't like this, and you took offense to it? Or are you very open to the idea that it doesn't matter?
The writer's dilemma.
Yes.
Yes. Have I ever taken offense?
Yes.
I try not to take personal offense because I just kind of divorce the idea that it's, personally toward me. I have worked for wonderful people. I've worked with wonderful people. I have also worked with assholes, excuse the expression, and I've worked for a-holes. I've actually found that once I understand that that's how they are, I actually have no problem with them at all because I understand where they're coming from. So I try not to take any of this personally. But one of the mistakes that a lot of new writers make when they enter into screenwriting and television writing is, it is true, nothing happens until it's written. In that sense, writers are the ultimate creators.
Right.
They create everything. It's like an actor interprets the characters on the page, a director interprets the story on the page, and those things are incredibly valuable. And just there's no diminishment to any of that. But a writer starts with a blank screen. Everything has to form in that person's head. All the characters, the scenarios, they have to create people that have never existed in situations which are mind-bending, with resolutions that we can only hope for. I mean, it's all right there. So sometimes new writers get very possessive about that. And they expect everything to do exactly. They expect to see it exactly the way they saw it in their head, and that's just not possible. So I have worked with actors who have completely maligned things and decided, well, I can just do whatever I want. I'll rewrite everything. And that actually drives everybody crazy because the script is approved and there are so many different things that rely on the structure of that script. But I've also, I also keep an open mind when I'm dealing with people because I try to understand what their perspective is. And I understand that if you take ego aside, they are still an audience. And when I write, I'm only writing as much as I can from the entire script. I'm still only writing from my perspective. So they may point out something that I totally missed. And that's happened several times. And I appreciate
nothing wrong
it when
with that.
happens.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, and I appreciate it when they do that. I want it to be better. My name's on it either way. So I want it to be better. And some of the best relationships I've had have been with people with actors who understand what the writer starts with, understands all the levels, trusts the writers, but also does not have any fear with saying, but here's something that is not in sync with what I think we're doing or what my character is. No, but taking offense to it, no, I wouldn't last very long in this business if I did.
So the characters the actors, about their characters, they have an input and an understanding of how they think their character should be too. Mm-hmm. And so there's a working relationship between the writers, the script writers, and the actor. And if that works out well, then it just improves the character itself. True?
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. You're all going toward the same goal. You want a character with emotional honesty, and you want a realism. Ultimately, you want the audience to forget that there's somebody acting and forget that somebody wrote it. When I write dialogue, for example, I've been complimented by actors, fortunately, on how well I write dialogue, that it easily fits into their mouths, is the way it's phrased. But that probably comes out of my own acting and improv background, and the fact that when I write, I actually speak all of my dialogue out loud as I write it, so that I know it can be said.
Because it sounds when it comes into your ear out loud, then it sounds right.
Yeah, and by the way, and that's a great point, because it's the difference between how people write dialogue in a novel and how people actually speak dialogue. It's a lot different. Our brain actually interprets differently when we're reading it off of a page. But your dialogue has to fit into the actor's mouth. So if an actor takes your dialogue and still expresses the exact concept that your dialogue has, but says it in their own particular way, that's not a bad thing. It's actually good. It gives an emotional consistency to the character.
I've written letters that are not instructional letters, but motivational letters to my crew or to pirates or to entertainers, because I do an acting seminar also. And once I write the letter, I make my wife come into the room, and then I sit there and I read it. Because what's on the paper, I'll find myself when I say something out loud, it goes, well, that didn't make damn bit of sense at all. And I'll go back and correct it.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the same thing then, right?
Absolutely. In fact, my wife does the same thing for me. She'll read through my stuff. I'll read through her. She's also an author. And we give each other that feedback. When I'm writing outside of my skin, when I'm writing a woman or a person of color, the first thing I do is I remind myself I am not that person. I don't have that perspective. I can write as well as I can, but I triple the work on myself because I want to make sure I get it as close as possible. Now, I've been complimented for writing female characters, and I appreciate that compliment. But the fact is I'm writing characters who are female. But even if I do it as well as I can, 100%, just like I know I nailed it, I know I nailed this character, I will then take that script and I will hand it to one of my close friends who is a female, and I'll have her read it, and I will tell her, now you tell me where I left the toilet seat up.
That's a good way to put it. That's a wonderful way to put it. Well, when you wrote Xena, Princess Warrior, I would guess that 60 to 70% of the dialogue was hers. So you're writing as a woman, as Xena. So you do have to have some second and third set of eyes looking at it.
Yes. Yeah, we do. But also, Xena was such an exceptional experience in so many different ways. We were so much in sync all the way across. Now, we were a dysfunctional family, not like everything was roses. And
you mean dysfunctional as the crew and the characters in the family, right?
Yeah, I mean, just we were a family. And we would get into disagreements, we get into arguments. But at the end of the day, we were of a like mind. So it was lightning in the bottle in that particular case. We had the right group of people and the right group of writers. And as I said earlier, we would basically write something for Lucy or for Renee or for Hudson or any of our characters, and we could hear their voices already, but we were writing toward a particular point. Now, if we completely diverged off of something that was critical to, say, the gender differences, then yes, we would be corrected on that and we would move on. Not necessarily always from the set, because at that point, it's actually gotten out of our office. Usually inside of the office, we try to solve those problems. But Xena was actually one of the most writing-friendly environments that I worked on. I have worked on shows where a certain amount of stuff gets changed and maligned, and you kind of grit your teeth and do it. But on Xena, we were for the most part really in sync on that.
Well, I'm a big fan of Lucy Lawless, and she was a very interesting character when she did the Roman Gladiator series.
Yes, Spartacus.
Spartacus. She was a very interesting character there. Mm-hmm. But I was still a fan. But I'm going to ask you about somebody else that I'm a fan of. Okay. And I don't hold back. Okay. I'm a big fan of the B actors, and he actually wrote a book about being a B actor, and that would be Bruce Campbell.
Ah, yes, yeah, Bruce.
Now, have you had any interaction with him?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, obviously, working on the show
because he was like what was he, the King of Thieves in Xena Warrior? I think.
Yeah, he played Autolycus, the King of Thieves.
Autolycus, yes.
And that character was created on Hercules by, I believe, Doug Leffler wrote that script. And then when it was brought over to Xena, I wrote the first Xena episode with Autolycus in there. And yeah, Bruce is again, an amazingly talented person. He's got the look, he's got the chin, I'll tell you that. He's really good with comedic timing when he has a really good script that allows him to do that. He's also a director. People don't know that about him. He's actually a very good director as well.
I do. I have his book. I follow him.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
He did, and again, I'm going to go back to the fact that sometimes when I'm talking like this, I forget some of the names and things. But he did a really great series that was done out of Miami.
Burn Notice. Was it Burn
the
Notice?
Burn Notice, that's it.
Burn Notice, that's right, yeah.
And he was, I loved him in that. And the main character in that was always great. And he's done some other things too. But I've just been a big Bruce Campbell fan for forever.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you go and put B actor listings, there are a crap load of actors that people know who they are only by their characters, but not by their real names.
Right.
Because television and movies are full of those actors.
That's the meat of the
It
performance.
is.
Yeah, it really is.
It is. It's the meat and the bread and the potatoes of the whole thing. And,
yeah.
And we have a couple of friends that are going to be on our show over the summertime that are some of the Pirates of the Caribbean. They were just character actors, but their characters were an important part of the scenes or the parts of the things that they did in Pirates of the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. And without them, like in these TV shows, without those character actors, the story doesn't have as much strength.
Yeah.
True?
Oh, I agree. The interesting thing about character actors is that they come into that heading of like, oh wait, I've seen her before. I just don't know what have I seen her before in. That's a character actor. It's like somebody who has done this. And a lot of times a mistake is that you just need to hire somebody for the connective tissue, because they're never the lead person, but they are a secondary or tertiary character. I can tell you from my experience, casting those roles is more difficult than casting the lead roles. You really have to hit that.
Why is that?
Because those characters, as you just talked about earlier, they enhance the entire performance. They are the connective tissue. Many times they're the mirror or they're the reflective part of the main character. They're maybe the person who points out the character's flaws. There's a careful balance there. But without that, you would basically just have a lead character that, you're kind of watching a narcissistic lecture.
So
but I have many friends who are B actors, and they work all the time. And yes, absolutely, without those particular roles, but without the right people to fill them, the shows would be very shallow.
And without the right writers to bring them into it.
I appreciate that.
Because those B characters, here's the analogy I'm going to use. Those B characters, based on what you just said, those B characters, that's the little angel and the little devil that sits on their shoulders of the main character to keep them in line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it can be multiple characters or a main character. Sometimes they're sidekicks, which I hate that term. I don't believe in sidekicks, but they serve that particular function. Kevin Quigley, who, by the way, is from Lutz near Tampa. I've worked on 2 shows with Kevin, and he is a character actor. He was on Swamp Thing. He played the role of Graham, and he was on my series Sheena. He played the role of Mendelsohn. And he and I are friends. In fact, we've been playing Dodge Phone in the last couple of days, trying to get together again just to hang out. But he's got such a great look and a great delivery and a great performance style that he's the kind of character, when he plays this character, you can write one line that has 18 layers and he'll hit every one of them.
Wow. So who are the... I'm sure there's other questions that are popping up that may be more. Here you go. What would you like to write that you have not written? Wait. What would you like to write that you have not had the opportunity to write yet? That's a good one.
And by the way, Jim, I saw your question. You just asked about if I had anything to do with Miami Vice. I didn't write for Miami Vice. The guy I mentioned earlier, Chip Chalmers, who got me on the set of MASH, he actually started his directing career on Miami Vice. And Philip Michael Thomas and I are actually distantly related. He and I tried to put together a series at one time. We were going all around the studios with this one particular idea. Now, what would I like to write that I haven't? There's so many shows that I would love to write. And they're shows that I certainly appreciate. I guess, but first of all, I'm not geared for favorites lists. If you ask me what my favorite are, I'll have to give you all sorts of parsing answers because I could change my mind in 2 minutes. This is going to sound like a weird answer, but what I want to write is the next project that I haven't gotten out there yet. I mean, I've been in development for the beginning of my career. I've had so many projects and development deals. Most of them never see the light of day. That's just the way the industry works. But there's still ones I want to finish. I want to do. I want to see them come to fruition. There's a bunch of shows on right now that I look at and I say, oh, I would love to do that. I would love to interact with that. A League of Their Own is just a fascinating, incredible series. The new Black Mirror series, the first episode of that was just like, I was like, I wish I'd written that one. It was so good. Yeah, you know.
I just finished watching a series. It was only 8 shows, so it's the first season, and it's on Netflix, and it's with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And,
Fubar.
Fubar.
Yeah.
I found it relaxingly entertaining. I think it was good. I liked the characters in it. Some of the characters were unpredictable, and that's a good thing to have in your characters, is for them to be unpredictable. And I will say this about pardon me. I will say this about Arnold. I also will say this about John Travolta. Their older characters, their older abilities as actors, I've enjoyed them. I was never a John Travolta fan until he started doing some other things as an older actor. Same with Arnold Schwarzenegger. A lot of the things he did in the beginning were like, it was all about his muscles and he couldn't act. But he's become a better actor now, and I like some of the things he does.
I tried to get Arnold to direct an episode of Sheena at one time. I had a connection to Arnold through a mutual friend, and I knew Arnold wanted to do some directing, so I actually wrote him a letter about that. He wasn't able to do it. He wanted to, but he wasn't able to do it. But he's actually a good example of what you were talking about. The best thing that Arnold ever did. He started his career being Conan, being the muscle guy, all of that, muscle, action. That one was when he was considered to be a B-movie actor. He exploded when he did one thing. He made fun of himself. He got a sense of humor about what he was doing, and he played with that.
Was that the movie that he was like the boy? I can't think of the name of the movie, but the boy had the ticket and gets involved in the movie.
Last Action Hero.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
Now, he had already
where
launched
I
himself.
think.
Right, he launched himself with Terminator. But if you remember, when Terminator first came out, Arnold was still considered to be the muscle man because the Terminator itself was written like a robot. Because, spoiler alert, it was.
Yeah.
But the moment
and
he
that was
started
his acting
making
ability
fun of
too,
himself-
robotic.
Yeah, exactly. So we didn't know what he was capable of. But the moment he started getting a sense of humor about himself, people were kind of sat there and they went, you know what? I kind of like this guy. And that was what is important about Arnold. You want to have lunch with him because he's a fun guy. That's the
Last
impression.
Action Hero was a great movie because it made fun of him, and those iconic stars that do movies that turn around and do that to them. That's where the likeness of them, the enjoyment of them, comes more apparent to the population.
I agree.
And it's just it was a great movie. So what's your favorite? I mean, you've done so many, and that's probably a really unfair question to ask you because with everything we've talked about, Xena is the one we've talked about the most. But is that your favorite, or do you not have a favorite because you have certain things about all of them that you enjoy?
It's the latter. There's just so much I could talk about different shows. Every show I've done, even if they're not critically acclaimed, doesn't matter to me. I put as much as I could into them. I've learned from every one of them. And I've always found something to enjoy. Most of the time, I just enjoy everything. It's kind of like I'll say, what is my favorite show? Well, Riptide has to be because that's where I started. That's where I learned everything. A-Team has its own particular things that I really loved about that. Highwayman, working with Sam Jones. And, I still run into Sam at conventions and everything, and it's pretty funny because he's the big Flash Gordon guy, but he's a guy I worked with on Highwayman. He's an awesome guy to talk to. and work
Well,
with them.
Joe Penny in Riptide, he goes on to become a bad guy in several other movies. And he does a great job as a bad guy, too. So he's got a character stretch in both directions, which is really one of the things I like about some of the characters. If they can play both sides, and the problem is some of the characters take on this character role, and then when you put them in something else, it's like, it doesn't work for me.
Yeah, that's another thing. You've got to facilitate what it is. How do I put this? There are some people who their acting is a lot bigger than what you initially think of them as. Hollywood is really good at pigeonholing you. And the reason for that, it goes back to money. If you are really good at something, they don't want you to move out of that because that's where the money is.
True.
For writers, if you started out on a detective show, which is what I did, usually the studios will say, no, you're a detective writer. That's it. We're not going to take a chance moving you into sci-fi or moving you into fantasy or moving you into drama or moving you into comedy. Well, guess what? I have done all of those. I've managed to go back and forth and write all of those particular things. Everything from animation to comedy, drama, science fiction, fantasy, detectives. I've done that. I can't explain how I managed to do that, to be honest. I'm still kind of fascinated with the fact that this all happened. But you have the bigger problem with actors because I'm behind the scenes. When you see an actor in a comedy, that's all you're ever going to know. That's a sitcom actor. Where is that actor going to go? Well, I will use one name, Tom Hanks.
Oh, yeah.
His first show was Bosom Buddies.
Yeah.
He basically played it wasn't a cross-dresser. He was a guy who needed an apartment. He and Peter Scolari, needed an apartment at a particular school, but the only open dorm was a women's dorm, so they dressed up like women and pretended they were women. It's a callback to the what was the movie with Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon? I think it was.
Yes.
Anyway, we'll think of that in a moment. But look at that. Then after he did that, they took a chance on him and did a movie called Maze and Monsters, which was a takeoff on Dungeons and Dragons. And in that, he was an extremely serious character. And I remember when I saw that, I went, oh my God, this guy's got it. So, but he could have been pigeonholed, and that happens a lot with actors, unfairly, I think, with a lot of actors.
And you know what's really, we try very hard to steer away from, and Some Like It Hot. That's the movie. Remember that's
right. Some Like It Hot.
Some Like It Hot.
Yeah.
So we try very hard to steer away from anything political in this show, anything at all. We talked about that in our pre-conversation before the show.
Right.
But what Tom Hanks did, his first series, Bosom Buddies, wouldn't go off today at all.
Probably not, but there's a lot of things that fall into that category. All in the Family would be one. There were a lot of shows which, it was a different time.
Right.
It's not to excuse anything, but there were some things better about it, some things bad about it. But the bottom line is it was different. And as I mentioned earlier, just like a TV series is a living creature. Entertainment, film, television, all of that's a living creature as well.
So you mentioned in our conversation wait a minute, I'm going to look at this question. If I missed this at the top of the show, but Mr. Sears, do you have podcast or book? Do you have a podcast or a book?
I do not have a podcast. The book that's showing right now, that's actually a graphic novel that I co-wrote with Kevin J. Anderson. And that is, it's a futuristic concentration camp, a battle between humans and aliens in a war of genocide. And this, by the way, is, we're going back to Stalag X for a second. Stalag X is under development with United Pictures Entertainment. They did Rocket Man, 1917. Francis Lawrence, who directed 3 of the Hunger Games, I Am Legend, Red Sparrow, a lot of my favorite movies. He's actually the one that's directing it. So that one's in active development. Well, it's being paused right now because of the writer's strike, but it is in development over there. And the second one you showed, right there, yes, that's a book I wrote, which is still relevant. And it's basically a book about working as a television writer. It's not a book to teach you how to write. There's bits and pieces of that. But so many people who have worked in this business for a certain amount of time realize that the mechanics about script format and all the stories you hear about how to do this and how to do that, the do's and don'ts, you can get those out of a lot of books. But the second hardest thing is breaking into the business. The hardest thing is staying in the business. And a lot of that is basically experience and philosophy.
Well, that's consistency too.
Well, that is true. You always have to have the goods and be ready to deliver it. But that book came about because, mentioning Kevin J. Anderson again, Kevin is an established author. He and Brian Herbert write all the Dune sequels, all of those books. I think Kevin has 26 million books sold worldwide.
Wow.
But we've been friends for like 30 years or something like that, and we'd always wanted to work together. So he was coming out here to visit me. He lives in Colorado. He was coming out to visit me, and we were going to be taking some meetings at the studios, and he said, I don't know anything about your business. And I said, I have a whole bunch of notes that I use when I talk to classes and do lectures. I'll send you my notes. So I sent it to him. And when he showed up, he said, that should be a book. And I said, there's not enough there to be a book. And he said, do a word count on it. And so I did a word count on it. It was like 70,000 words. And I said, see, it's not enough. And he goes over to my shelf and he pulls this book off my shelf and he goes, this is probably 50,000 words. So under him, with him giving me advice and guidance, I restructured it into that book. And it's published by Wordfire, which is Kevin's publishing company. And I didn't mean for this to be an advertisement for my book, but that book is there.
Look, when we bring guests on, if they want to advertise or talk about their works, we love that. And Davey is quick enough once in a while to put ticker tapes at the bottom to make sure people know how. I'm actually going to go look for the book because I do an acting seminar here. And here's there's your website at the bottom.
That is me.
I do an acting seminar, and one of the things that I do, and the acting seminar I do is based on all my failures in 50 years as a comedian, a magician, a pirate, whatever. And it really truly is based on all my failures. I use my failures to show everybody here. And one of the things that I talk about, and there's two things that I'm going to throw at you. The first one, there is constructive and destructive criticism. You would agree with that as a writer?
Oh, yeah.
And constructive is great. And if you're open, like it sounds like you are, because you've had some of your scripts changed or delineated from the line, you're okay with that because that's construction. That construction builds. Destruction is terrible, and I tell people in the business, in the entertainment business, ignore that. Destructive criticism doesn't help you. It's just meant to bring you down, and if you leave it alone, it doesn't work. Agreement?
Oh, yeah. I will tell you that there's a whole chapter I wrote on how to take and give notes on a script. And this applies across the board. The first thing you have to do is a little bit of psychology to understand who is giving you the input. Now, it's not just enough to have somebody giving you input, whether it's constructive or deconstructive. You need to understand the person. So it's like even when I lecture in classes, I tell the students of the class, don't just take my word for it. Look at, study my background so that you'll know how I apply this. Because somebody from Hollywood could come in next week and give you an answer to the same question that's 180 degrees different from me, and we're both right because we both have different experiences. But in giving and taking notes, which comes to this construction and deconstruction, if somebody is just being an a-hole, okay,
True.
You have to deal with that. You understand it. If you understand it, you just have to deal with it. Most of the time, people are not like that in this business. Most of the time, you may disagree and they may come up with stupid comments and stupid input, but there's always kind of a reason behind it. So what I've told people is the first thing you have to do when somebody gives you criticism is assume they're right. You have to do that. The reason for it is creative and political. It's mostly creative. The creative aspect is this. They might have picked up on something you missed. So you've got to try to see it through their eyes. What is it that they're seeing that you're not? Now, if ultimately you realize that they're wrong, then you get to go back and you can say, okay, I understand where you're coming from, and talk about it from their point of view to show them what you saw. If you realize they're right, it's easy. You're like, oh my gosh, I should have seen that. How can I take advantage of it? And you incorporate it. Now, that's the creative aspect of it. The political aspect of it, which is just kind of a sidebar to this, is that you don't become defensive. And if somebody gave me a script and said, read this script, and I've had this happen to me, and I tried to give them input, if they become defensive on everything that I'm trying to give them input, and I've spent a lot of time reading their script, well, the problem is this. If they're working for me and I give them all this input and they fight me on everything, when I get their script back after their rewrite, I'm actually going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb to make sure they did every one of my notes, because I don't trust them. They fought me. They fought me. They fought me. They weren't trying to see what I was trying to say. They fought me. If, however, I felt like I was having a conversation with them, then I'm going to trust them. And they probably will not do all the notes I give them, because I give them the freedom to make the choice in most cases. But I will trust that they had the correct reasons for disagreeing with me. So I tell people, if you're getting input from somebody else, here are your responses that you give to all of their stupid notes and all of their great notes. This is the responses you give. That's interesting. I hadn't seen that. You know, I really got to think about that one. That's a good point. Let me see how it fits in. All of those responses are neutral positive, but they're not committed. But by giving those responses, the other person feels as if you are giving them a fair audience. And they're trusting you as a result.
That's a good point. Because of my 50 years of being a magician and having done Vegas and other shows, comedy clubs and whatever, I have magicians that will come to me and say, hey, I'm going to do a show. Will you come and watch the show and critique my show afterwards? And I always tell them, no, I will not. I will come. I will enjoy the show. I will buy you a drink after the show. And that's the end of it. Mm-hmm. Because in most cases, critiquing somebody doesn't always work out in the positive fashion, because it's just not a good way to. Now, if they invite me to the show with no expectations, and then after the show they say, "Hey, what did you think of this?" or "What did you think of that?" and I would say, "This is what I would do," or that was great. And it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If they ask you to come and be a part of it, or read a script, or do whatever, and they ask you up front, they don't always really want to know the answer.
Yeah, that's. I will give an example of somebody without using names.
That's fine.
It was somebody who I was running a show, and somebody I knew had written a screenplay, and they said, I'm going to start production on this in about a week. Would you mind reading it? Now, this was a person who was doing independent film, so it wasn't like a major studio or anything. This was a person who was going to be directing an independent film. And I told him, I said, now you should understand something about me. I cannot read a script and give you a casual answer. My job would prevent me from doing that. I can't stop my mind from doing this because I'm a producer. When I read a script, I'm problem solving. I'm looking for things that can be better. I'm looking for problems, but I'm also looking for the wonderful stuff about it. So when I read it, I can't give you a simple, this is wonderful. I'm not going to do that. It's not my nature. I'm actually going to give you input. And his response was, oh, that's what I want. That's what I want. That's what I want. So I put everything aside for the weekend, and I read his script. And back then it was a hard copy script on paper, and I'm writing notes in the margin. I got about to page 22 before I stopped writing in the margin because it was just too much. It was not a well-written script. It just wasn't. There was a potential there. The story was good. The characters were interesting, but it just wasn't laid out well. So I made notes kind of briefly on a pad of paper to talk about everything else in the script, because everything at the beginning has a ripple effect. And I called it. And so I said, here's my input. And I started from page 1. And every note I gave was a struggle. Oh, you didn't see it correctly. Oh, it'll look differently when I shoot it. Oh, that's not how the character's in my mind. So on and so on. And I got to like probably the 15th page, and I said, I realized that you weren't actually asking for my input. You were asking for my approval and blessing. And I said, so let me give it to you right now. It's wonderful. It's fantastic. You're an incredible writer. Please go and produce this as you wanted to. There. And he immediately said, oh, no. I actually value your input. I said, I don't get that impression. I said, but I'll send you the script with all the notes and the margins. You do what you want. Now, to give him credit, he did produce the movie. And he did pay for he paid the actors and everything. So he was not cheap about it. I give him credit for that. But when I saw the movie, he had not made any of the changes, and it was still as problematic as I envisioned it. And so he sent me an email and asked me what I thought after I saw the movie. And I sent him back a note, and I said, all of my comments stand. And that was it.
Wow.
It's a difficult thing. And if you're talking about somebody who's a friend, it can really strain a relationship.
It can. It has. I'm sure it has for you. As entertainers, and you've been both a writer and an actor. So I'm going to ask you another question. You've mentioned at least one or two times you have improv background. Did you do comedy clubs, or what did you do?
My life is a comedy club. Ask around.
Well, so is mine as a pirate, I'll tell you that.
I imagine. And by the way, since you are also a magician, I'm sure you do this as well. You want to see what my rosary beads are?
Aye. Yep, absolutely.
I will just sit here and I will just do shuffles and cuts, even as we're talking. That's my rosary bead.
When you come to St. Augustine, we'll sit here and relax with a couple of decks of cards and have a good time.
That sounds awesome.
But have you done comedy clubs or improv at all?
I have done improv on a theatrical setting. I've not done
Okay.
comedy clubs. I think anybody who has tried to do comedy realizes that's the worst death in the world, to be on a stage and your
Oh God,
comedy
it's
flat.
terrible.
I had a friend who was working at the comedy shop here in a comedy store, the big one, the one
Yeah.
that was so well known.
Comedy, yeah.
Yeah, who was a piano player there. And I would go in there and I'd visit him all the time. And he thought I was just hysterical. And he said, next time you're in here, I'm getting you on stage. I have yet to go back. But I did do improv a lot in theatrical settings, obviously in acting classes. And I think for any writer who wants to write screenplays, take an improv class. You don't have to be fantastic at it, but you will instantly learn. Well, not instantly learn. You will learn how to instantly create characters, create scenarios, create interactions, create resolutions, because that's what improv is. And that, by the way, is television. We do not have the schedule to screw around. So things have to happen quick. And the same thing, by the way, goes for actors. Actors should learn to write. Try to write a script, even if you're not going to be a writer. It will teach you. It's kind of like if you've got a car and you have a problem with the car, you drive it until it falls apart, you take it to a mechanic and they can fix it. Eventually you get rid of the car. If you are somebody who knows how a car works, has built one from the ground up, you will always have a car.
So out of all the actors you've worked with, and this will be a really, again, pardon me, this may be a very tough question, and if you don't want to answer it, I'm okay with that. Everything's unscripted, as we talked about. Out of all the actors you've worked with, are there any that come to mind that had an improv ability that during the taping or the filming of what they were doing, they went away from the script and did something else and it was successful?
It's a very interesting question. I can say that the vast majority of the stuff I've done, people kept pretty much to the scripts. First of all, if you go off and do something else, you still basically have to obey the script. Scripts are not just dialogue. Scripts are everything.
It's the law.
It is.
And when you stray away from it, then you screw up every one of the other actors that are in the scene too.
Yeah, and that means that I have to stay there for the weekend, rewriting all the scenes that have not yet been shot to make sense out of the crap that you brought to the table. And that has happened. There are some people that I know of who, especially in sitcoms, where people would just sit back and say, let's see what happens, roll the camera. Robin Williams was one of those.
And Jonathan Winters.
I was about to say, and when you had Jonathan Winters and Robin Williams on the same set during Mork and Mindy, it literally was just run the camera. We'll see what we can get out of this.
Yes.
Because they would just go on and on and on.
Right. I
run into them.
Now Davey will attest to this. When we go and do short videos of whatever we do, commercials for our pirate crew or for whatever we do, I'm not very good at scripts because I've always had this inability to memorize lines. Now I've gotten past that in my older age. I've learned the secrets to memorizing lines because I've learned that your lines intersect with everybody else's lines, and as long as you're doing close to your line, they still work. But we do everything ad lib, off the cuff, and because of my comedy club routines for the past 40 years, that's the way I live. Mm-hmm. When I go into a comedy club, I'd show up with a suitcase and a table, set it on the stage, open it up, and I had 2 hours worth of material in that case. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm only allowed to do 40 minutes, but I only would pick out the tricks that as I was reading the audience, I knew would work, hopefully would work, and those are the things I would do. But everything was ad lib. Mm-hmm. But comedy club can kill you because I've done some things that you think it's a great routine, and the audience is, oh, it's a killer.
Yeah, and that's the hardest thing. What you're talking about is not really, I don't call that unscripted, because you have basically a what I would call a shot list. You have your list of things that you want to do. I want to hit these points, but basically, if you tried to script it, you would fail every time. Because
Absolutely.
The importance of what you're talking about is you are playing the room. Now, that's something, by the way, that comes in extremely importantly when I go out and I pitch stories or new television series. That's where my improv ability actually comes into play, because I'm playing the room. Once I've got it scripted, I technically have control over everything. You know, I'm working with the director, I'm working with the actors. So that's an environment that things have to fit together. Even if there's little variance here and there, it has to fit together. But when I go in to pitch an idea, first thing I do is I walk into the room, into the office, and say it's for an executive at a studio, and I start to look around the office because I'm picking up cues onto what this person is like. Everybody who has an office has little telltale cues because they bring a little bit of their home and their personality into the office just to make it bearable. So I'm getting the clues as to what they're like. I start talking with them, just chit chat. I get an idea of them and their personality. Then when I start pitching, and if I'm pitching to one person or a group of people, it doesn't matter, I am now reading the room because I am aware of their reactions to everything that I'm saying, and I can adjust and alter it. Because if I go in there and I'm pitching something about an albino vampire that stalks people in Antarctica, and which, by the way, hold on, I got to write that one down.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Let's say I'm pitching something like that, and I get up to the point that I'm about to say, stalking in Antarctica, and I hear somebody say, oh, that would be great in the tropics. I immediately play that. I will go with that. And now I have to keep conscious of all the ripple effects in my pitch, how that affects everything, because now I'm going with that. Because I'm trying to sell the series. Now, if it was integral to the series, that's a completely different scenario. I've had that happen where somebody says, we don't want to do that. And it is actually the core of the entire series. I've had that happen, and you still adjust. Magic.
See this magic? Look at this magic.
Wow.
I need a ginger beer. It just floats down to me. All right, go ahead.
So, but that's where the improv comes in really handy. But again, it's like you getting in front of a stage of people. I'm doing the same thing. I'm reading the room. So when I go home, I have to write up everything that I just pitched, even if it has changed, so that I can then send it back to them and they can say, oh, this is exactly what we talked about. But that all takes the improv. It takes reading the room. Once we get past that and it's scripted, that's a completely different animal.
It is one of the things we talk about in my acting seminars. You have to read your audience.
Right.
You can't tell a joke, and I'm trying to think of a good example without being, you can't tell, hey, pirate walks into a bar with a ship's wheel in his pants. That's a great joke with adults, but you can't tell that with kids in the area.
Right.
And vice versa. So people sometimes don't read the room. You must have to read the room every time you go in to sell yourself, because you're selling yourself.
Right. Every actor, and I know that we get a lot of actors that are watching this, who's done stage, will tell you that they can feel the audience. They may not even see the audience because of the lights, but they can feel it. They can feel the response.
It's energy.
It is energy, and it's something that you just feel it. When I was doing stage performance, back then I was incredibly nearsighted, so I couldn't see the audience if I wanted to. They were just wow. But the great thing about that was that I felt them, and I could adjust on what I was perceiving from them. Even though I was keeping to the same script, the same play, I could adjust my performance to try to get something out of them. And by the way, somebody who was really great at that was Tony Randall.
Oh, yeah.
People who remember him, he could adjust himself perfectly for an audience. He was fantastic at that.
His character, and we're going back to The Odd Couple, Klugman and Randall were a perfect comedy duo because of the way they played.
Yeah.
I've always been a fan of Klugman. But they were a great comedy duo because they both had their own abilities and they played off of each other's inabilities. And that's one of the things I try to tell some of the people that take my classes. You don't have to be the center of attention, but by making some of the other people the center of attention, you become the center of attention. I'm the captain of a pirate crew. And sometimes I brag about the conquest of my crew, like all the donations we gave over the last week, $1,000. That's not me. That's my crew. That's my crew doing a great job. And by them doing a great job, I'm made to be a good captain. Not a great captain, but a good captain.
Yeah, it's always keeping an eye on what you really want to accomplish. I will say that one of the best compliments I was ever given as an actor was when I had to do an improv in front of a casting director. And this was at some performance audition showcase or something. And there were five or six of us on stage, and we were given this scenario, and we were told to immediately begin. You know, you are such and such stuck in an elevator with such and such and such and such. Begin. And every actor has to suddenly get their character and everything. And so all the other actors came up with their characters and they started talking about their situation. And I didn't say one word during the entire improv. I didn't say one word. All I did was react to what they were saying. When it was over, the casting director gave us input. And she said, but I have to tell you, the person I was most interested in was Steve. He captured my attention because he was reacting to what every one of you was saying.
Wow, that's pretty cool. You have the chops. Now, we've already, prior to this, in our pre-show, we're the same age, same year.
28, yeah.
Yep, that's it. I was going to say 29. I appreciate the extra year.
Well, I just turned 28. It was a U-turn, but I did.
Very good. So, you didn't start out to be a writer, but are you gratified by everything you've been a part of?
Yeah. I'm still just incredulous to this adventure that I've been so blessed to follow.
In other words, you still have more horizons to go on.
Absolutely. I'm not stopped yet.
Very
I'm going to
good.
hit the wall head on. I'm not kidding when I say I still haven't figured out what I want to do with my life. I'm just having too much fun with it. Now, it's not that life is easy and that it hasn't been a struggle in some areas, but even with the acting, I love acting. I still love acting. I never even knew about the love I could have for writing. So my acting is still, I love it. It's up here. And writing is just a little bit higher. But I still love this. And I started acting again, at least as far as stage performances are doing. I've been doing Shakespeare, which is so weird for me to do, but it's so awesome to do. But I've returned.
I didn't start out to be a pirate at all. Not in any way, shape, or form. Literally, and some of my crew and some of my friends know, when I was ready to leave Las Vegas and come home, I wanted to build a dinner theater in 2007. That's 14 years ago, give or take. And we tried it. The two things that made it a failure was that my aunt, who was going to be the chef, had died a year or two earlier before that, and it kind of took all the wind out of the sails. But we came here and found a place that had a stage, and we did my shows, and it was a miserable failure. I mean, we have those, don't we?
Yeah.
We have to have some failures because it makes us strong. And in that failure, many people, and some of the people that are watching the show who followed me from all these years, said, well, dress up as a pirate and just go downtown and do card tricks in the bar. And that's what I was doing in bars that were like period correct, so to speak. Taverns, pubs. And dressed as a pirate doing card tricks, and I was doing very well as William Mayhem. But I've had the character William Mayhem for over 40 years because I use that character in haunted houses and other magic shows, and now the rest. Now this is it. So, have you ever aspired to return to St. Augustine High School and teach acting as Mr. Mandela's did for you when you were young?
That's a really great question. Thank you, Jim. Mr. Mentalis was such a wonderful instructor. And this was back when the entire arts budget for all of St. Augustine High School was less than $400 a year. That includes band, chorus, everything.
Yep.
I mean, we became so adept at dumpster diving to get our props and just bring in whatever we could. And John Mentalis, also a man with his military background. Interesting. We found out later on, my dad and him, I think they had met in Vietnam at one point. But he had such a love for theater, and he kind of like expressed it with us, and allowed us to experiment and play with characters. And teaching is such a difficult thing. I'm in awe of teachers. So many of my own personal stories about my growth I can chart back to a teacher, someone who said, yes, you can. So have I ever thought about going back to teach acting? I love being able to.
I have a challenge for you based on this conversation right now. I have a challenge for you.
Okay.
When you're ready to come back to St. Augustine, let's you and I sit down and work out a seminar based on you and your talents and your experience and what I already do as an acting seminar. Let's combine it together and make some kind of a real impact on St. Augustine.
That's a good possibility. We should talk about that.
And the reason I put that up is because Nightingale in Florida says, Steve, you would be much better than Mr. Metalis.
Oh. Well, thank you.
I think it would be a wonderful opportunity. I would be flattered to be your opening act. And then let you have the bulk of the show, the bulk of the seminar. But I would be flattered to be your opening act.
Now, see, I will put that around and say, I will be the closing act that gets everybody to leave. The way I look at it.
That's a good way to look at it, too. I like that. So here's a question for you, because I haven't seen any of it here, and Davey's doing a great job paying attention to the questions. Have you ever come up with an idea to do a pirate show?
Yes.
Have you really?
Oh yeah.
You want to tell anybody about it?
I don't know how much I can talk about. There's some things I can't talk about because they're still, in various stages of development.
Wait, before you say anything else, do you need an actor?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what type of actor I would need, or what type of look or performance I would need. I'm just not sure.
All right.
Uh,
But tell everybody what if this is actually. Go ahead and tell everybody.
well, there have been various times that you have to understand the idea, as you know. The idea of being a pirate is just not a word saying I'm a pirate. It's just not arg and having, a somewhat decrepit chicken lying on my shoulder here.
Right.
There's the historical pirates. And even
because you know St. Augustine, you know that historical part.
Exactly. And I always have some mock arguments with certain friends of mine. I can't say they're arguments, but it's become like a routine where the pirates of St. Augustine will be mentioned. And I will say, pirates or privateers?
Aye.
That's right. Get it straight. Which one is it? And I always kind of make that distinction in my thoughts, because pirates are different from privateers, and yet there's still a certain amount of overlap and similarity. But the idea of the kind of Horatio-esque character who has the world on his or her shoulders, and really the power of life and death over a crew, and yet the wisdom to be able to use that correctly. It's an intriguing character in any type of scenario. So I have, first of all, played with the historical aspects of privateers. I have also played with various interpretations of how either pirates back in the time would be, or pirates in the future might be. My wife, Jessica Warner, she wrote a book called Captain Jack. And, well, the character is Captain Jack. I should remember this book. And it's a great book, but it's dealing basically with a pirate in an alternate history of steampunk. I find steampunk to be very fascinating as well.
I find it fascinating and aggravating.
Yeah, it's, because of you and I could get into a great discussion about that. And I don't disagree with you. It's kind of like when I see a show about magic. The problem with magic is that it's hard to buy into a universe where everything can change on the whim.
True.
It's like you build a wonderful difficulty, a wonderful conflict, and everybody's in a nice tight box. How do you get out of it? Well, you pull out a wand and say, escapum decorum, whoop, and you're gone. Why didn't you do that when you first had the problem? So steampunk, unfortunately, has a lot of tattered edges to it. So it's making the consistency work. And that's one thing that I really concentrate on my own writing, is making the consistency consistent. As Frank Lupo, who co-created the A-Team and The Wise Guy and Hunter and all these other shows, he put it this way. He says, bullcrap has its own logic. If you convince them the bullcrap is logic, then you have them. Because everything fits into that universe. Everything's got to make sense. So with steampunk and pirates, like I said, Jessica wrote this great story about that, and it's got a great plot to it. And I'm not trying to sell her a book, although if you want to, look it up. But I was really attracted to her characters who were pirates. Now, in the past, I have worked to develop series that dealt with different aspects of piracy, some of them based on real characters, some of them based on fictional characters, some of them based on real characters with a severe bent to them. There's a whole area of historical piracy that people ignore. The pirates of the China Seas and the Asiatic region. Fascinating. They toppled empires. I mean, that's incredible. So yeah, I've always been fascinated with that particular character. So several of my projects either deal directly with piracy or still have that little pirate in them.
Well, we'll have to sit and talk privately, because as a tour guide in the Pirate and Treasure Museum, which is the largest pirate museum in the world, based on its artifacts, I delight in telling people certain real aspects of St. Augustine pirate history But towards the end of the tour, I use this now as a improv comedy point. I delight in telling people at least 4 points of their childhood of belief of pirates is completely false. And I destroy their childhood. I love it. And it's... But when they find out the real lineage of that idea, they're more intrigued by pirates now than they were when they found out that walking the plank never happened anywhere. They're more intrigued because they now know where it came from and why did it come from that. And so when you teach history and you blend movies into it and then wipe the movies out and tell them this is how it came about, people really are intrigued by it. And we're working on the idea now that I've done over 9,000 tours in the Pirate Museum. And with 9,000 tours, I've met a whole bunch of people who love pirate history, but now walk away and love pirate history even more because they find out that walking the plank and buried treasure and the pirates saying "R" and the parrot on their shoulder is not as interesting as the real pirate history of what they could know.
Yeah.
The same with privateers and pirates. I always tell everybody that the only difference between a privateer and a pirate is which end of the weapon are you standing on when we meet. That's the only difference. Legally, historically, the only difference. Because many of the pirates had letters of marque from kings and queens. Drake would be one of the most notable, with a letter of marque from Queen Elizabeth I. But he destroyed the Spanish. Here in St. Augustine especially, you know that. And I always like to delight in telling everybody, the Spanish didn't stand on the street corners and mix up margaritas and pass them out to Drake's men as they were burning their homes around their houses and tearing everything up because they said, oh, it's okay, you're a privateer, we okay with that. So blending the concept of real history and pirates, or real history and fictional. Oh, somebody asked a question, and there we have that now.
There it is. The First Sin, novel, The Adventures of Captain Jack.
I'm going to have to find that one.
It's the first of the 3 books.
Or implore you guys to send me a couple of copies to go to my collection.
Okay.
But back to what we were talking about. When you start to bring people in to the idea that fiction and reality have a middle ground, people are more entertained by that. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely. I did a short story for this. Actually, I'll show you this. Alien versus Predator. Ultimate Prey.
Everybody knows that one.
Yeah, and this is an anthology book. It was the first one that was published by Titan Publishing with Fox and Disney because it dealt with 2 franchise characters, one of them being aliens and the other one being the Predator. And a lot of people have seen the movies where they come together. And there have been many books about those 2 interactions, but this was the first time an anthology was being written. So I was asked to submit a story. Now, I am not known as an author, but I was asked to write this story. Everybody else who is in there. Those were all accredited authors. So when I was trying to come up with a good story for this, a lot of you, this is St. Augustine based, you're going to love this. So as I was trying to come up with a story on this, I actually know a lot about the Alien background from the Alien movies. The Predator franchise, not as much, and it's complicated. I mean, it's as complicated as Klingon. I mean, they have different names for the case systems, and they even have a name generator for the individual characters, and there's a whole hierarchy. They have to basically kill, worthy opponents to rise up in their case. It's extremely complicated, like a college course. And I was like, I'm never going to be able to learn all of this. So I'm going to tell it from the perspective of somebody who doesn't know anything about this. So it's a first-person account written by a Spanish nobleman in the late 1700s who grew up in San Agustin. His closest friends were actually at Mose, Fort Mose, because they traded together quite frequently. He was there as a child when Oglethorpe attacked the city. He watched the militia and the Mose defenders throw back the English, and he hates the English because he's a good Catholic. But after the English took over St. Augustine and Florida in 1773, he, of course, returned to Spain. But now he has to administer his plantation's interests. He has to deal with the English. So I started my story with him stranded on an island. He's been shipwrecked on one of his returns to San Agustin. And while he's there, these eggs appear. Now, those are the alien eggs. And in the predator lore, predators will seed an area with eggs so that the aliens will be, come out and they'll adopt some form depending on the local life. And then they come down and they will kill them or not kill them, but that is how they get their cred. So it becomes like an arena. So he sees these creatures come out of these eggs and attack the monkeys that are on the island and take on their form. He doesn't know these are aliens. He interprets these as malvados, the evil ones. These are from hell. These are demons coming to destroy the world because he's a good Catholic. Then these three predators show up, these giants, and they start fighting them. And he can only look at this as saying, these are the angels from heaven. These are the Nephilim, the giants that were mentioned in Genesis. They are coming down to destroy these. But as he's watching this, the three predators, the Nephilim, are being defeated. They're losing this battle. And during one of these interactions, he sees sails approaching the island. And he recognizes these sails as being from England. These are Lutherans or Calvinists. He hates them, but he wants to get off the island. He runs down to the beach, and by the time he gets there, he sees there are three longboats pulled up on shore. And there are Englishmen standing around. But they have also brought slaves. And the slaves are being brought in to pick up some food to try to, forage in the island. Keep in mind, he was raised with his best friends from Mose. He hates slavers, hates them, but he has to get off the island. And before he can warn them, the aliens attack. The English are slaughtered, except for one Englishman. The slaves, however, even though they're chained together, they form a group, and they start making noises and stamping their feet and pushing toward the aliens. And they're moving over the dead bodies of the Englishmen, picking up their weapons, their swords, and keys to unlock themselves. They're acting like a military unit. As this goes on, they defeat the aliens. They push them back from the beach. Now, the other key to this is that all of these slaves are women. Now, I wrote this story up. That was just the beginning of it. I wrote this story up. And what happened, and I have to say right up front, I actually agree with this process. They have things that are sensitivity readers. And I agree with this process. I actually encourage it. And it's basically that I have a certain perspective and a certain look. I'm a white man. And there are things that Disney especially has to be careful of. So they wanted to make sure that I was, getting things correct. And I was like, great, bring it up. So they were sending me constant questions about my stories. Every time they sent a question about these stories, I linked them to the actual history of St. Augustine. I linked them to the actual history of these women who actually existed. And at one point during all of this, I told them, I said, you do realize that everything in my story is 100% true, except your aliens and your predators. Everything else is factual. When it was all done, it was approved. It ended up in the book. I got a letter of compliment from the publisher, the senior editor over at Titan, for being willing to answer all these questions. Because they even brought up questions about the Temecula and the Calusa, the Native Americans that were in the region at the time, too. But the head senior sensitivity reader, who was an African-American woman, had them send on a message from her. And she, first of all, said she appreciated how detailed I was, that I actually knew the history of St. Augustine and I knew that region. And she also, and complimented to me too, she said I was completely unaware of these African women. And she goes, they're actually from a region that my heritage is. And I just want to say thank you for that, which is, I was like, oh, that's awesome. But everything was connected to St. Augustine. And I have to say, when the editors read the story, I still have the text that they sent me. They just said, this is amazing. This is great. This may lead off the entire book. And I'm kind of sitting there thinking, well, I'll take credit for the actual writing of it, but really it was born of ignorance because I don't know enough about the predators, but it was brought to fruition because I love history and I love my hometown.
What a great possibility for a series or a movie, though.
I hope so.
Well, good. We'll have to talk about that.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
But that's where I'm very detailed with research. So I always look at it this way. If I have to stay on stage with 2,000 fans of a show and they ask me the most bizarre questions, I had better be ready to answer those questions. So I'm very, very detailed with my research.
Well, we have lots of fans of this show, and we've got wonderful response to everybody being a part of what we're doing tonight, and that's always been a good thing. We love that. This is our 87th episode, is that right, Mr. Longwood? 87th episode.
87.
Good for
87.
You. That's awesome.
So we've done really well, and we hope to keep building it. We got to get you to come here to St. Augustine and hang out.
I will. I've got to get back there.
You need to come back. Bring your wife.
Oh, fine.
Okay.
No, Jessica's nice.
She is awesome.
Actually, I have an offer for you, another offer. It may not be a lucrative, great offer, but we do a pirate festival in St. Augustine on the grounds of the Colonial Quarter, and the next one is February 2024. Pardon me, 2024. The first weekend. We started developing this as part of the Pirate Museum. We have Authors Row. Authors Row is people that write books that are either pirate genre or family genre. It doesn't have to be pirate. And last year we had 7 authors bring their books. They get a space for free. They get to talk about their books. They get to autograph them or do whatever. And it went so well that I now have 12 authors wanting to do it next year.
Oh, wow.
It's just to set up in an area that we want to, we don't charge them. They don't pay. I want literature to be one of the main points of our Pirate Festival. And bringing authors in is a wonderful way to do it. You and your lovely wife would be welcome to be a part of it, but I would do other things to make sure that you had a seminar to talk about what you're doing at our festival.
Oh, well, thank you.
So if you need a date time frame to make plans to come back to St. Augustine, first weekend of February would be great. In 2024 would be great.
I will have to take some serious lookage at that.
And if you come
no
a couple
football
of days
game.
before, what's that?
There's no football game. What?
That's true. There's no football games. That means you entirely have to devote yourself to my cause.
Oh, well. Okay, fine.
But you could come in a couple of days early. We could do something a couple of days later, stay on Monday, and that Monday night you could be a part of the show.
When I come back to St. Augustine, it's never for just a couple of days. No,
Good.
too many things I want to dive into, too many friends to see. A lot of them I've seen in the column here, so that's kind of cool.
We have tons of our fans watching the show tonight and paying attention and asking questions. Anything else come up there, Mr. Davey? You want to pop up on the screen? Because I do notice there's one. It's been great seeing you again, Stephen, but I have to be in the air in 6 hours and need some sleep. Going to be a long day, night all. That's Sky Jockey.
Yeah, I have some great stories about hanging with him.
Yes,
he's awesome.
He is. He and Melinda and several of the people are part of our crew. Now, we have a lot of people that watch the show and they don't comment, they don't do anything, but the crew is very supportive of what we do. Mm-hmm. And I want to send you a gift, too, so I'm going to need your address and everything, but we have a chip that we give to everybody that's part of our crew, part of our show, and I want to make sure I send that to you. But when you come out, I'll hang on to it and give it to you in person if you like. But when you come out, I'll have a couple of decks of cards on my table over here in my pirate room. We'll sit here and just handle cards and have a good time.
I got to work on my routines.
Hey, you don't have to work too hard. Our fingers are not as dexterous as they used to be. That's for sure. And I have to cheat a little bit here and there. But combining the magic and the pirate together has been a great character for me. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that when you're writing, that combining talents and characters and personalities into it is what makes the characters that you come up with so endeared to most of the people that watch your shows.
Yeah, I hope that's true. I like to think it's true. I certainly have enough success at it. You know, that's the hardest thing for me to say. One of the things that I constantly get reinforced or badgered about. I actually promote myself a lot. That's just my nature. I'm just a military kid from a small town in Florida. So, but I have agents or publicists or something like that. People like that have always done that kind of stuff. But if you ever looked at my business card, I'm going to see if I have my business card here. You will see something. Oops, let me grab it. On the front of it, there's the old picture of me, and you know it's old because my beard has actually got color to it. But if you can read what it says.
Alleged writer.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people think I put that on there as a joke. But it's not a joke. It's one of those things, as I said, I got into this by accident. I'm doing something that I just absolutely love. I don't know if I'm any good at it, but people keep paying me, so I guess I'm a writer. I'm alleged.
It's the same thing I say about being a pirate. This wasn't what I wanted to do or what I thought I would do. Maybe not wanted, but what I thought I'd do. But, and the Pirate Museum has really opened the doors, kind of like you're writing for certain things in the start of your career. Mm-hmm. Certain doors open, and when those doors open, you don't have any control over what's going to happen.
Yeah, a lot of people don't let the door open. That's the thing. A lot of people don't allow the door to go open because they're so fixated on something else.
I'll give you 2 points, and I don't always try to bring it back to myself, but because it is Captain's Quarters podcast, it means something. Mm-hmm. I've been with the Pirate Museum for 11 and a half years. They've been open for 11 and a half years, and when Pat Croce hired me, he said, "Going to make you the most hated pirate in all of Florida." He was right. Because I have the constant doors open that allow me to do so much as a pirate. Mm-hmm. And so many people that are in the amateur stages, they get upset with that. Here's the other one he did. In 2015 and 16, and Davey can correct me on it, might have been 16 or 17, I was asked to play Captain Hook in the St. Augustine Ballet. And I did it.
Okay.
Originally, I wasn't going to, but when I told myself that if Christopher Walken and Dustin Hoffman can play Captain Hook, so can Captain Mayhem. And so I did it, and I had a wonderful time being in the ballet. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say this. I did not wear a tutu. It would have been a 4-4 on me. That's a different story. But I got to choreograph the sword fights between me and Peter Pan, who was a very famous Cuban ballet star. And I got to work on some of the dance routines with my pirate crew, which were jigs and jogs and everything else. And then after the first year, Pat Croce, when he was in town, we were having a glass of rum, and he said, "Why would you subject yourself to doing ballet?" And I said, "Because in your books of motivational speaking, we're supposed to step outside of our box and experience our talent in other directions." Mm-hmm. And he went, "You're absolutely right.
Yep.
No more conversation."
Yep.
And that's what we have to do. You've been a writer. You've been an actor. You've been an advisor. I'm sure there's some other things we could put into that. But we're the same age. Mm-hmm. You've had a career of 3 decades, 4 decades, 5 decades, you pick the choice of how much time you put into this business of entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen it come and go, ebb and flow. And our contribution, whether it's at Captain Mayhem's level, which is way down here, or Stephen Sears' level, which is way up here, we all have that ability to put our input into it and create the entertainment that people love and remember. And all of our fans watching the show tonight remember all of your shows, especially me. That's why I have a cigar.
That's right.
Because Hannibal is one of my favorite characters of all of them. But he was a good character in a lot of the movies he played.
George? Oh, yeah, George was
George Peppard was a great character.
Yeah. George was a wonderful actor. Those blue eyes could just like pierce through anything. He was not an easy person to work with, and he would have been, in fact, he did tell people that the moment you ended up on the set, the first thing he said to you was, "I'm George Peppard, I'm not easy to get along with." He would actually phrase it a little more flowery than that. So, but yeah, I mean, the Blue Max, and all those other movies that he had been, yeah, he's just a fantastic actor.
He was a wonderful actor. All the actors you work with are iconic and remembering of our joy of television shows from that time frame. I just, there's so many things I can't say because it just I don't have the words I want to put to it. But some of them are some of my greatest look upon, not heroes, but look upon. I can't think of the word I want to use.
Yeah.
They were the ones that. I'll give you. Here's the way I can express it. I'm a huge fan of every one of the Dean Martin celebrity roasts because all of those comedians are the kind of comedy that I like, the kind of comedy that I still use, the kind of comedy that I have to be very careful with when I use because some of that comedy would not be allowed today.
Borscht Belt. Yeah.
But those were the iconic comedians of the day. Jonathan Winters, Slappy White. I mean, these are the people and now here I am doing the same thing.
Yeah. I'll tell you one of the things that, and I know we're going long, you can cut me at any time.
Don't worry about it. This is a great show.
Well, there was a lot of the people I've worked with. As I said, I'm not somebody who's easily starstruck. There's only been one person I've ever chased down for a photo. That was at the Magic Castle, and it was Richard Stewart of Robert Richard Stewart. They wrote all the Disney songs that I grew up on, and I was having a conversation with him with a friend, and as he walked off, my friend says, "You know who that is?" "Oh, Richard Stewart." I went, "The Richard Stewart?" And I chased him down. And I took a photo of him in the castle, which is not allowed to do that, but I did it. And it's one of my treasured photos. But I have ended up working with a lot of the people who I grew up watching on television or in films. And I'll give you an example of, if you remember the series called The Time Tunnel.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that was one of my favorite series as a kid.
It was
Science
a 1960s show.
Yeah, two people lost in time, and they're trying to get them back. And the first episode, they were on the Titanic, and then they would go to different time periods where they would experience things. And one of the characters was named Tony. He was kind of the uncontrolled type of reactive young man, and that was played by James Darren. He was a very famous singer and actor at the time.
Right.
And anytime I played these characters, I was always Tony as a kid. I was always Tony. I wanted to be Tony. So calendars fly off the pages. Many years later, I'm writing for the A-Team. And Jimmy Darren is directing one of my episodes. It was the first time I believe Jimmy had directed. It was one of his first directing things, certainly early in his directing career. And so at the time, I was engaged to somebody, my first wife, and I had to talk with him, with Jimmy. I got a call from Jimmy, and we were talking about some stuff that had to be done for the next day's shooting. And so we're talking about things, and I finally ended the conversation. And I said, "Okay, I'll see you on the set tomorrow morning. Thanks." And hang up. And so my fiance, she turns to me and she goes, "Who was that?" And I said, "Oh, that was Tony from Time Tunnel." It hit me that I was actually talking to somebody that, as a kid, I used to want to be him or be the characters that he played. So that's happened several times with people that back then, like, Bill Shatner, same thing. Bill was doing a documentary about fandom, and he wanted to interview me. And so we sat there and we had this really great interview. And then afterwards, we were waiting for another actor to show up. I was going to introduce him to her. He hadn't met her. And so we were just sitting out at the Equestrian Center, just shooting crap. And I was like, I'm talking to the guy I used to watch on TV when I was just a kid. And we're just having a conversation. It's this really out of body experience that's hard to explain, because I have to admit I'm a part of that. So circling back to what you're talking about, those Borscht Belt, those comedians of old that you used to watch, and you love their humor, you've identified with them, you are now one of them.
Yes.
There's a disconnect in there somewhere, I'm certain.
So have you done, I don't care if we keep going, because this is the longest show we've ever done. This is over 2 hours.
Sorry.
I'm okay. Don't be sorry.
Okay.
If our listeners want to watch it later, they can, but we've got some great people that are still sitting with us. So have you ever done a sci-fi con or any kind of cons at all?
Oh, yeah. I'm regularly at... the first convention I ever did was in Dallas. I actually have the poster on the wall here. It was called Stellar Occasion 4. I think it was done back in the 90s something. I was one of the, what does it say here? I am the writer guest of honor. I'm actually reading the placard that's up here. But I've done those.
There's a con in St. Augustine?
I had heard about that, and I don't know a lot about it. I know the big one is in Orlando. Yeah.
So there's a con in St. Augustine called Ancient City Con.
I'm actually bringing this up.
It's on the same weekend that is in conjunction with Talk Like a Pirate Day. The guys that are running the con are coming to my house tomorrow to talk to me, because Captain Mayhem, and what we've done, we've been a part of the con for the last 5 or 6 years. They give me a spot to hang out and do pirate stuff or whatever way we want. We've done a live podcast with some of the other characters that were there. If you wanted to come and hang out for the weekend, I'd put you in my booth. We get the whole booth in the lobby, and come hang out. You and I can talk privately of what it would take to compensate you to be a part of that, because you are a big name, I'm not. But I would be willing to look at whatever we could do. Don't you think that would be really cool, Longwood?
Yes.
Yes. And come hang out.
I'm actually looking at some of the people from the 2023. And it's funny because I've talked to Jeffrey Combs.
Yep.
From Deep Space Nine, because he and Chip Chalmers was a friend of his. He directed him in Deep Space Nine, so I've met him through that. Armin Shimmerman used to live across the street from a good friend of mine. In the early days of the internet, I went to fix my friend's internet, his wireless internet, and I noticed that every one of the people in the neighborhood, their wireless systems were completely unprotected. I could have hacked any of them. The only one who was not open, the only one that was protected was Armin's. He's the only one not that I was trying to get into them, but he was.
So we got to talk to.
That's pretty funny.
Again, I can't think of, if you look on all the websites of Ancient City Con for the past couple of years, you'll see Captain Mayhem as part of the whole thing. But we got to speak with so many of the actors and did some tape recordings for our show. But if you had the opportunity to come here that weekend, we're actually on that Monday night doing a huge party at the studio because that's the 20th anniversary of Talk Like a Pirate Day on that Monday night.
That's
and the two guys that created Talk Like a Pirate Day live in California, and they're streaming into our show that night, along with Tom Mason of the Blue Buccaneers, who wrote a song. He's a musician, a pirate musician in Nashville. He wrote a song for Talk Like a Pirate Day back then. He's streaming in, and then Rusty Cutlass, who we mentioned earlier, they're going to be here that night. We're going to have a big party. You could be here the whole weekend and then be part of the big party with us.
And is that always in September?
Always in September, that weekend close to September 19th. So I think this year it's September 16th and 17th.
Oh, let me check. I know there's something happening in September. Let me check. September. Let's see. Okay, September's open except for, let's see, when I get into the 24th of September. Into September's not open. There's always a possibility.
Look at it and figure it out, and let me know what I need to do to enhance that a little bit.
Crystal hamburgers. No, I can't believe that. My wife can't believe I like crystal hamburgers. I do.
One of the stars, or one of the celebrities, or one of the actors of Pirates of the Caribbean is the blonde woman that slaps Jack Sparrow.
Mm-hmm.
She lives in this area, and we become friends. I'm trying to get her on the show soon, but we do a pirate seminar where people come and ask us questions and sit there and talk about pirates and pirate movies, and she's one of them, and she's part of it too. And it's a great weekend. We have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
And the guys that are running it are coming to my house tomorrow to talk to what they want me to do this year, and it sounds like what they're going to give me is a whole space in the lobby of the entrance of everything, so we get to see everybody that comes in, which is a good spot. I like the lobby.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be wonderful if you wanted to be there, and we'd promote you and everything else you do and be one of the friends of the Swashbucklers and have a good time. But if I have to put some extra incentives out, I'm not going to put dollar signs on it, but if I have to put some extra incentives out to get you to come here and be a part of that weekend, I would do that.
Oh, let's talk about that. I'm actually surprised that I haven't. I do a lot of cons. Mostly by invitation, but I also will seek out cons. Like the one that was in Orlando, I just showed up at that, and at that time they had an entire Xena thing going on, so I just showed up, and it's like, oh, he's here, call security. But Ancient City, yeah,
it would be. It's your hometown.
It is,
and it would be fun to have you here.
But so many people know my secrets. I don't know. I grew up with a lot of these people, a lot of you people.
Hey, I'm a pirate. I take care of those people that speak secrets.
And by the way, Synchronicity Connection, St. Augustine High School, class of 75. Back then, we had homecoming skits. Okay? Class of 75 won homecoming skits every year. And in the last year, I was Captain Hook. Chris Blakesley was Peter Pan, and we rigged that auditorium stage so that he could fly across it.
Wow. Very cool. There's so much we have in common. We've been Facebook friends for several years.
Mm-hmm.
We've just never had long conversations. But I'm thrilled and flattered and honored for you to have been on the show tonight.
Absolutely.
And we do have a couple of things we should do. Davey, because of the length of the show, you want to eliminate a couple of things, or you want to just go ahead and do them? You're the navigator. You tell me. I'm
really
just the captain. I abide by what the navigator says.
People like the history ones.
Which one? The history or the nautical history?
Probably This Week in History.
Do This Week in History right now. That'll give Mr. Steven a chance to take a breather for a minute. And do that one, and then we'll come up with some other things. Go ahead. Wonderful. You know what, Davey? You put that Marine Land thing out there.
I saw that myself.
I grew up in Marine Land. My mother in the 1950s was a dolphin feeder, and my dad was a shark walker for Marine Land Studios in the 1950s. So
And
that's
I
always
worked
a very
there.
special part. What's
I
that?
worked there in the late 1970s.
Did you really?
Yeah, I mean, I worked at the old jail. I did tours around the city, but one of the jobs that I have actually told people, when people have asked if you couldn't write anymore, what job from your past would you return to? That one I name immediately. I loved working at Marineland. I was an announcer, and I ended up doing everything from announcing, maintenance work, caring for the animals, training. I did everything except directly dive for a show. And I did that on my off hours in the tanks because, well, I wasn't supposed to, but the Aquarius was very, very nice. So it allowed me to do that.
It's really it's a double-edged sword. It's really a shame that the shows and the dolphin shows and everything else are gone from Marine Land Studios. But the other edge of the sword is if it wasn't for Marine Land Studios, there'd be no SeaWorld.
Oh, I agree. And also, I'm a firm believer that when I was there anyway, the marine biology unit from the University of Florida was prevalent. They did a lot of work there for studying the animals so they could be cared for even in the wild. And I learned a lot about caring for animals, the responsibility, and how when people are exposed correctly to animals, they do care about them. If they're not exposed to them, they won't care whether they die off or not.
Right.
I also, when SeaWorld was built, there was a whole conversation about the fact that they were going to bring orcas in. And I remember it was either Dave Nelson or Al Zamba said, just that's a mistake. Those are not creatures you should put in captivity. Now we had a pilot whale, but that was a lot smaller, a different temperament. But yeah, we were always taught to care for the animals. We never we couldn't force the porpoises to do something. If they didn't want to do it, they didn't do it. But some of my fondest memories, I even wrote a pilot about inner city kids from Los Angeles who was a part of their probation, were told they could either go to juvenile hall or they could work one summer at Marine Land of Florida to care for animals. And I wrote that pilot. It never did get sold, but I did write that pilot based on my experience.
What a great idea, great show. That might have been pretty cool.
It would have been.
It would have been. Yeah, I'm just a firm believer that the more we know about animals, the more we care.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'm in a discussion and an argument with the county commissioners about a piece of property that's adjacent to mine that's wetlands and full of wildlife. And there's a meeting tomorrow that they want to tear it all down and put up an apartment complex. And I've sent them a 2.5-page letter telling them why this is not a good idea. And I've gotten at least one comment back from one of the commissioners saying they agree with me and they're voting against it. So there's 5 commissioners. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I've got one. If I can get 2 more, we're good shape. But it's wetlands. It's right next to my property, and there are wildlife there that people don't even know are there.
Yeah.
And
there's always that double-edged sword. It's I haven't been living in St. Augustine since I left in 1980, but I moderate Chico St. Augustine Memories Board. Chico Dennis created that. Part of that is because I just want to keep in touch, and the little town is growing. I know this is hugely
exponentially.
Yeah. And it's hugely controversial, and it's progress, it's movement, it is income, but at the same time, it's the battle we always go through. So the wetlands battle, the expansion battle, I have huge mixed minds about that. I'm nostalgic. We always wish for the home that we had.
Yes, absolutely. Very much so. So, Davey, we've been paying attention to the messages. We don't have to worry about that. What's our guest on deck? We've got some good guests coming up over the next couple of weeks. We have the sheriff coming in again. He loves being on this show. We have the assistant fire chief. Next week is all about mermaids.
Who is
I
this
have at
show?
least 4 mermaids as a part of the show. July 3rd, history of the 4th of July. Not sure if I've got a guest yet, but we'll worry about it. Sheriff is coming in. Ron Brown is coming in, National Rum Day. John Miriam is coming in, National Radio Broadcasters Days, but I have a couple of dates that are open. I may have already filled them. You'll have to pay attention. But we have a great guest coming in. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to be a part of the show, if you are a captain of a pirate crew and you need to advertise the charity that you're doing, we just helped another pirate crew this last week and donated $700 to their charity. If you want to be a part of what we do and advertise, send us a message. We'd love to have you sit in that chair. I'll move all these characters out of the way and you can be a part of the show. Or you can sit with them. It's up to you. We need to finish out the joke of the week, Mr. Longwood.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Because Mr. Sears is actually still trying to figure out what a pirate does with his cell phone.
Yeah, really. I've been
right.
kind of contemplating that.
Okay, mates, it's time for the answer to the joke of the week. What does a pirate use his cell phone for? The answer is booty calls.
I
I
Mr.
don't know you. I don't know
Mr.
you.
Sears, you have my
That's Minnie
permission.
Mayhem, not me.
You have my permission to use that if you want.
Well, I have to think of somebody that need enough to use that on.
Yeah, we have to actually understand the age of that idea. We'll figure it out.
That's funny,
So
though.
we always like to say thank you to everybody that's involved in the show. And before we started doing this, we used to say thank you individually. But we developed a video that we like to put out there that says thank you to everybody. Mr. Longwood, that thank you is now needed. Please put it up.
The Captain Quarters podcast is indeed a ship sailing the seas of the world, always in search of history, knowledge, and adventure. It takes a crew to run a ship, so we take this opportunity to thank those who help keep this ship afloat. Our sponsors, the St. Augustine Pirate and Treasure Museum, Dick's Wings and Grill, Spyglass Travel, Ancient City Sirens, Riker's Reenactors, Paper and Strings, and Shiver Me Pictures. The supporting cast and crew, Captain William Mayhem, Navigator Davey Longwood, Gunner Hellfire Henley, cartographer Mandy Joan. Of course, we've got Juan and the Powder Monkey. Helping others gives the crew purpose. The charities we support are Inc., Investing in Kids, St. Augustine Youth Services, and the Humane Society. You too can be part of the crew and support the show in many ways. Go to Patreon and become a Powder Monkey or a First Mate level. Go to YouTube and become a supporter or just a contribution to the cause. Thank you. It does take a crew.
Very good. Very good. I appreciate the work you did on that one, Mr. Longwood. So
Thanks.
we've talked about our video and we said thank you, but how about if we show the platforms that everybody can watch us on or listen to us on? Ladies and gentlemen, you can watch us on YouTube. At the end of this show, it'll download automatically to YouTube and you can watch it anytime you like. We're on Spotify. We're also on Instagram. But if you just want to listen to us, Stitcher, iHeart, CastBox, Apple Podcast, and Music Amazon, you can listen to us. It's one of the reasons why you may notice a difference in our thank you at the end of the show. That thank you is normally just a bunch of videos that we have music to, but Mr. Davey Longwood has put his voice to it. Now you can hear us say thank you to everybody that is part of our show. Our show numbers are excellent, ladies and gentlemen. We've been at this now for only 87 episodes, and we have 1,077 subscribers. We'd love to have more. We're getting 2.4K in views, and watch time hours are 230 hours a week. That's really good, but it's not enough to make YouTube pay for us. We need more. So join us, ladies and gentlemen. Tell your friends to subscribe to us. You never know what new things are coming down the pike. As Jack Sparrow always said, "Aye, bring me that horizon." And that's what I want all of you to do. Bring us that horizon. Make us a part of your life in some way, shape, or form. Let us be your ideas of what history is all about. We don't argue about history here, ladies and gentlemen. We share it. And if you have a different opinion, as long as you have facts, we're happy. Please never argue with us on history based on your feelings. Always on facts. And that's how we run the podcast. It's been a great show. I can't say enough thank you to Mr. Stephen L. Sears. I've been a fan. You've been on my Facebook page. It's wonderful to finally get a chance to talk to you. And I'd love to have you be here in person, either in September for the Ancient City Con. And I'm actually going to dangle that worm over those guys tomorrow when they come to my house tomorrow. But if that doesn't work out, we've got February 2024. We're doing Old City Pirate Fest. We'd love to have you be a part of that. But your time and your travels are for you. And if you want to be a part of it, we'd love to have you here. You'd be an honored part. As you can tell by all the comments of all of our watchers and listeners,
Well,
I give you the last words before we close off.
Well, first of all, thank you. I am honored to be here. This has given me a nice little hometown feels, which is something I haven't had in a long time. And I appreciate that more than I could possibly express. Talking with you, the familiarity we have, the common backgrounds, things that we share, our own little town. And then I have to tell you, just watching names come up over here and the comments of people that I knew when I was there, just has really warmed my heart. So one way or the other, whether it's a con, whether it's a book fair, whether it's a pirate fair, somehow I'll get back there, and regardless of all of those things, we will all get together, and I will lift my Diet Coke, but we'll definitely have a toast to the past, the present, and the future that can be. And I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, we appreciate you being on the show. It's been a great show. This is our second greatest show, 2.5 hours.
Wow.
Now, there's two ways you can look at it. One, we've got a lot of great things to talk about. Or two, we're just a couple of old guys that don't know when to shut up.
I think we're a little bit of both. I know that's...
I would agree with you.
I think you're kind of in the same cat. I describe myself sometimes as saying, if you ask me the time of day, I'll give you the history of the clock. I think you're probably similar to that.
Absolutely. And the history of what you've done and the shows you've been on are beloved by all of us. Some of my favorite shows. I mean, I'd love to, I haven't asked you to do this, but I'd love to have it so that I could meet some of these stars. But all that being said, we have a great way to sign off on the show, and it's time to do that. And the show will close. Don't go anywhere for a few minutes, but go ahead, Davey.
Part of the podcast.
Part of the crew. Always. We can't do it without all of our fans and all of our listeners. So tune in every week, 8 p.m., Monday nights. We thank you, Captain's Quarters Podcast. Thank you all.